Hey there, welcome to the Instructors Roundtable. My name is Adam Kanakin. I'm the host of the Tactical Breakdown podcast and your host here for the Instructors Roundtable on active threat response. Brought to you, as always, in partnership with our friends at Caliber Press. And this episode is sponsored by our friends at LA Police Gear. You can check them out at lapg.com. You can click the link in the YouTube video below. Use the promo code Breakdown, save 10% on anything you purchase from them. Full disclosure, the link in the YouTube video and on our website is an affiliate link. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps keep the lights on. They kick us a little bit back, and it lets us bring this to you each and every month. So thank you to LA Police Gear for sponsoring this episode. Now, I do want to preface what we're going to talk about today by saying that it is April 30th, 2020, and although this episode was planned months in advance, it falls on the heels of the deadliest mass shooting event in Canadian history, which just took place in Nova Scotia, that took the lives of 22 people, including that of Constable Heidi Stevenson of the RCMP. So to our RCMP family, to the family and friends of the victims of this tragic event, I just want to let you know that our thoughts and prayers are with you in this difficult time. And I'm sure I can say that for everybody around the world, that collectively we are here for you any way that we can. Now, that being said, obviously there will be some discussion about the Nova Scotia incident in this roundtable. We will not be disclosing anything that's part of the active investigation, but anything that would be relevant to our conversation may be shared by myself or by some of the other experts. So just be prepared for that. And it'll be nothing that you're not going to get from the RCMP official media releases. So that being said, let's get into this roundtable. Let me introduce these amazing experts to you right now, and starting it off with Dr. Mike Simpson. So here we go. Mike served over 3 decades in the military as an airborne ranger and special forces operator. In 2002, he left special forces to attend medical school. After graduating with his medical doctorate, Mike trained in emergency medicine and still maintains a medical practice as a board-certified EM physician in the state of Texas. As an Army physician, he was assigned to the Joint Special Operations Command and deployed multiple times in direct support of the global war on terror. During that time, he was awarded the Bronze Star with V device for valor in combat, as well as the Combat Medical Badge for performing his duties as an emergency medical physician under enemy fire. As one of the foremost experts in both tactical trauma medicine and combat sports medicine, Mike is highly sought after as a lecturer and instructor, working extensively with mixed martial artists, law enforcement, and military organizations, providing medical care and training. All right, next up on the block is Mr. Tim Kennedy. Tim is an active, Ranger qualified Green Beret and Special Forces sniper with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as other locations around the globe. After being awarded his Green Beret in 2005, he was first assigned to the 7th Special Forces Group Alpha at Fort Bragg. During his time in Special Forces, he was deployed to both Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's an honor graduate from Ranger School. He attended Sniper School in addition to many other advanced special operator courses. Tim founded Sheepdog Response, a world-leading training company for law enforcement, military, and civilians. They specialize in preparing, equipping, and training people to respond effectively to any threat. This all to go along with the fact that Tim has black belts in both Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Martian Army combatives, and is one of the top-ranked MMA fighters in the world. Up next, we have Mr. Robert Carlson. Robert has been involved in active shooter training for over 15 years. For the past 7, he has been a senior firearms instructor and the active shooter program coordinator for the Memphis Police Department. Additionally, Robert has spent over 24 years in the U.S. Air Force, still serving in the Mississippi Air National Guard as a tactical air control party Joint Terminal Attack Controller. He has worked with multiple organizations providing active shooter training to thousands of law enforcement officers and military members across the United States. Robert is regarded as an expert in active threat preparation and prevention, providing training and consulting with several global companies and organizations. All right, and to round out our panel, we have Lieutenant Brian Murphy. Brian began his career in the law enforcement field beginning in the 80s. He served in the United States Marines from 80 to 85 before serving 5 years as a security officer at the United Nations. In 1990, Lieutenant Murphy moved to Jefferson, where he began his career in law enforcement. In 91, he joined the Oak Creek Police Department, where he served for over 22 years, over 17 years as a member of the Emergency Response Unit. Brian holds a bachelor's in criminal justice and a master's of science in organizational leadership. In August 2012, he was the first responding officer to the Sikh Temple massacre, which left 6 dead and another 2 wounded. He was shot 15 times during the gunfight and has been recognized on both state and national levels for his actions during that event. Okay, so with this lineup of instructors, I don't know how you can't be excited about this conversation we're about to have. Their bios speak for themselves. So much knowledge and experience. And before we let them in on the panel here, what I want to do is let everybody here listening live know that we're going to be doing some giveaways for you. So here's how you enter. What you're going to do is you're going to go into your podcast player. You're going to pull up the Tactical Breakdown podcast, which you should already be subscribed to. And you're going to leave a review. Type up, leave a review, screenshot it, send it to me at adam@thebreakdown.ca. And what I'm going to do is my buddy James Hamilton over at Gavin DeBecker and Associates sent me a bunch of copies of The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. So I'm going to package these with our IRT t-shirts that we had made. And so for the first 5 of you that do that, I'm going to be taking these and I'll be sending them off to you. So stay tuned for that. As well, we're going to announce the winners of our tactical gear giveaway sponsored by LA Police Gear, which is over $400 worth of gear that you can enter to win every single month. And it's for active duty or veteran law enforcement, corrections, military, or first responders. And we're also going to announce the nominee for the Instructor of the Year award, which we're running every month and announcing that at the end of the year. So without any further ado, I want to bring these instructors on and let's jump into this conversation on active threat response. Roll the intro. All right. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm so excited that I didn't screw that intro up. It's the first time. So thank you guys all for being here. It's an honor to have you all on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Nice having you.
So before we get into things, and I know we have a lot to talk about today when it comes to active threat response and active shooter. Robert, I was going to pass it off to you to kind of just give us a quick overview of exactly what these incidents are kind of by definition and kind of how that's progressed, and kind of just give us an overview of these types of incidents, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course. Well, by definition, what the FBI considers to be an active shooter is going to be anybody that is actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. Now, that leaves a lot of kind of leeway in there because what you'll see in that is you don't see the word gun, or you don't really see a weapon prescribed in there. And it used to be, but a couple years ago, they removed that because we started seeing events, active shooters, active threats, whatever term you want to put at it. We started seeing them use weapons that kind of covered everything. Of course, firearms being the leading choice. But we've seen explosives, knives, vehicles, Molotov cocktails. Pretty much you kind of take your pick, and we've seen them use them. The other thing that we also look at when we look at an active shooter or an active threat event is we look to see, does it have what we consider to be a preceding criminal motive? And so what I mean by that is if there's a gang affiliation, if this was some sort of gang shooting, or a shooting that was drug related, or even a domestic shooting where the domestic victim was considered to be the sole victim, we rule those out from active shooters because they have that kind of basic criminal motive that's attached to it. So it covers a lot of different areas, and that kind of throws it into an area where we have more of these than a lot of people kind of realize. Just last year, we actually had 28 events, and that's based off the study that just came out yesterday from the FBI. So there's definitely a lot more of these than what a lot of people realize, and that 28 is here in the United States as well.
Awesome, thank you. And as you said, I guess I'm the only Canadian here on the panel. The rest of you are all in the U.S. But it is shocking when we talk active shooter and active threat. It seems to be predominantly, obviously we have outliers, right? We have Christchurch shooting in New Zealand. We have attacks in London, but it seems that the majority of these events are taking place in the US. And now this isn't going to be a conversation about gun laws or anything like that, but because there is such a high prevalence in the US, there's a lot to discuss on that end as well. And it's also just as shocking that, today we're going to talk a little bit about the incident that just happened in Nova Scotia, where we had 22 people that lost their lives in an active shooter event. And one officer, Constable Heidi Stevenson with the RCMP, lost her life, and another officer was wounded. So that event had some parts to it that were kind of unprecedented almost in this type of event. One is the fact that they had a fully deckled police vehicle and uniform. The second is that just the time frame of the entire incident. And then the third being the distance traveled, which was over 100 kilometers, so over 40 miles from the first incident to where the suspect was killed. So, I'm gonna pass it off to you guys. What if one of those things sticks out to you? What is it and why? And let's talk about it.
Well, I think one of the big things, the big takeaways out of that event is there's two main factors. Like you said, it was the longest active shooter, or the longest duration active shooter, both in distance and in time duration. It took almost 13 hours. It covered multiple jurisdictions, almost 40 miles. We'd never really seen that before. This is what we would call a mobile active shooter, or a mobile active threat. So it's kind of a new situation that we're kind of learning about and dealing with. It's really only been around for, I won't say it's only been around, but it's kind of really become more prevalent in the last several years, probably about the last 10 years or so. So there's that big takeaway from it. And then, like you said, it's also one of the only events, and it's the first event inside North America where we saw the subject use or impersonate police uniforms as part of their attack. Really, the only other major event would be the Oslo, Norway event from several years ago, where we saw that similar kind of behavior. There's definitely some big teaching points and learning takeaways from this.
So, the tactics that this guy used, this is on the military side. We have been dealing with, insider threats. That's people impersonating, friendlies, whether it's in Afghanistan, dressing up like Afghanistan police or Iraqi military. This has been happening for a decade, and they've been seeing this be more and more successful. Anytime that there is confusion about who is the bad guy, if you look at Benghazi, for example, 13 hours, they actually have a beautiful scene in the movie where the ground kind of force was going into the ambassador's compound, and they're clearing as they go, and they're looking at guys coming out of bushes, and they're like, is he good or bad? And that creates a lot of confusion as to where's the battle line. Impersonating a police officer, impersonating friendly forces is something that has been prevalent on the war on terror for over a decade, and has become more and more common the longer this has gone on. And I was surprised how long it took for it to come here. This was not the first instance in which somebody tried to use that confusion to their benefit, but this is something that is going to happen more often moving forward, because it's existed around the world for the past 10 years.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Tim's saying. I'm shocked that it took this long for that to happen. It's been very successful overseas and in other areas. I think we've just gotten lucky that they haven't tried it or done it here in the United States or North America, really. So yeah, I totally agree with him.
One of the things that I talk about,
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. One of the things that I talk about, there's a talk that I've given a few times, and I even wrote an article basically about red cell planning. I'm giving another talk on it at TACMED Australia coming up. Is the OPT4 planning that we do in the military has not been, in my opinion, well translated into the civilian sector. And it has to some extent in a lot of law enforcement agencies, especially in federal law enforcement. But where we haven't seen that is at the state and local level. And I particularly frame this because of my background in tactical medicine as a tactical medicine threat, but it really goes across the board. And I think this illustrates it very well. When you have a person who is highly motivated, who has a lot of time to plan, has money to get the resources, they can come up with an extensive plan like this. And not only are our uniforms and our vehicles on full display to the public on a daily basis, and I'm sure that if you go back far enough, I'm sure they're going to find out that this individual was getting cell phone footage of police vehicles and police uniforms well in advance, and compiling this to make sure that he had as many of the details correct as possible. I'm sure we're going to find that out. Not only in appearance wise, but also when you come to TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. A lot of what we're doing in law enforcement, a lot of what we're doing tactical is fairly open source. You know, you can pick up any, from watching a podcast like this or watching a cast like this to, picking up any of the magazines, whether it's NTOA Monthly or whatever that might be, to GEMS if we're talking about tactical medicine. You're going to see tactics, techniques, and procedures on full display in great description. Where a control point is going to be set up, what people are going to look for to set up their control point. And the reason for that is obvious. People want to share these lessons learned. We don't want the lessons that we learned in Orlando, in Vegas, or now in Nova Scotia. We don't want other people to have to suffer the blood to learn those lessons as well. So those are shared. The problem is a lot of it ends up getting shared over non-secure means. And anybody, like I say, with enough motivation is going to be able to find that information, and they're going to be able to glean enough information that they can game our TTPs to the point that we become vulnerable.
Brian, go ahead, man. I know you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, back in at the Aurora, Colorado shooting, that was actually, he was wearing SWAT gear. A phenomenal piece of police work by this guy named Sweeney. During the middle of all this, he drove to the back of the theater. The bad guy was already outside. He had shot some gas inside, so he had a gas mask on. And Sweeney saw him standing outside, and a lot of their TAC guys drive. And he had a similar police type vehicle, all the SWAT gear that would have made him look like an Aurora SWAT guy. But Sweeney saw him, immediately got him under the gun, simply because he saw his gas mask had the canister in the middle, not on either side where you would get a cheek weld. So, I mean, I agree. That's the only time I ever heard of it prior to this, where there was at least somewhat of an attempt to embed themselves into the law enforcement. That'd be, if someone's standing there in a uniform, you're always training never to, don't point your weapon this way, that way. So now you have a total different mindset of the bad guy kids department, and to deal with that is it's just another training evolution that needs to be gone through.
I think that's a great point. And that's one of the things that's really interesting to talk about, especially from a training perspective. How do we start preparing officers to engage a threat that is essentially, dressed just like they are? I mean, obviously in the military, it's different. We're with OPFOR, we're used to that type of thing. But as far as law enforcement simulations and things go, usually they're not dressed like another police officer. So how do we start? Should we be starting to build that into our training scenarios?
Yeah, so I'll hop on that, Grenade. The military, I realize a lot of infantry units, it's very cut and dry, good guy, bad guy. When you start getting into more special operations, everything is about target discrimination. It's positively identifying your target. And that's something that, just like anything, it takes thousands, if not tens of thousands of iterations of somebody being able to quickly identify the outlier. When you're starting to do threat assessment, when you're 360 with vertical aware, and then you're starting to find the outliers that could be potential threats, and then you start breaking down what those threats could be, that's something that you can train in your brain. So, we use a lot of different targets, from paper targets to three-dimensional targets, to metal targets, low percentage targets. hostages where the hostage is actually the guy wearing the bomb vest, and the person behind him is the one with the gun trying to stop the guy with the bomb vest. So you see the guy with the gun, and you maybe shoot the guy with the gun, but then you look and you see that guy's wearing a bomb vest. You shoot them both. A woman with a gun running at a guy that looks visibly angry. The situation, as you're briefed, was actually a home invasion, and the perpetrator was the guy running into the house, and the girl was trying to protect herself. So you're trying to remove a lot of the training isms out of the environment. This cannot be everybody online. Walk forward 10 paces, shoot your paper targets. Go reload your rounds, come back here for your annual qualification. This has to be something where the shooter, the police officer, the responder is using their brain and starting to see things beyond where they've trained. And, you're not going to rise to the occasion. You're only going to rise to the level of your training. So you have to implement these types of scenarios into the regular training scenarios, especially for, advanced response teams. And I found that the best successful ways of doing that is creating scenarios exactly like precedents that's been set, like going through history and finding examples of, all right, here's where an officer imitated, or this is where a perpetrator intimidated or copied an officer's uniform. Now let's start messing with things so it's hard to determine who's good and who's bad. So the guys rolling up on scene have to actually use their brains to figure out what they can shoot. It's not just kick down a door and shoot the first target you see. It's get this to start working and figure out actually who is your target.
I think that's the benefit of you doing scenarios and reality-based training so much in what you're doing, and being able to incorporate all those kind of interactive, dynamic, 540-degree angles and threats versus sitting on a square range shooting at paper targets. Because let's be honest, you're really not learning a whole lot just shooting at a piece of paper. When the target interacts with you and you're able to pick up all of those nuances of what do they look like, but more importantly, also what are they doing and how are they acting? That's when you're really able to do that good target discrimination. And that can only be done with doing those scenarios and reality-based training.
One of the things that I talk to agencies about, and Tim and I have both had the distinct pleasure and privilege of being the Special Forces Intelligence Sergeant on a team. And the great thing about that job is during the planning phase, you're what you call the red hat guy. So while the team comes up with a plan, you sit on the other side of the room, you get as devious as you possibly can, and you come up with all of the possible ways that a bad guy can exploit that plan. And it literally needs to know no bounds. And the guys that are the best at it are the guys that are the most malicious. And that's what it really takes, is you need to come up with the most malicious ways that a plan can be exploited during the training phase. And, it has to be in everything, just like I obviously, because of my background, I harp on the fact that realistic casualty play has to be involved in everything you do. Realistic, what if, worst case scenario play should be worked in as often as possible, because one thing we know about all of these scenarios, none of them, when people showed up on scene, were things as they had expected, as they had changed. In the real world, it's going to be chaos. Aside from the smoke and the yelling and the blood and everything else, it's going to be chaos because that person that has initiated that event has started a chain of chaos just by their action.
I think the one thing that I've learned being into two of these is it's about speed. None of them, even my first one was more of a spontaneous. It was a domestic that sprawled out, and then I was in a hotel and I was on SWAT, so we were able to contain that. But the shooting at the Sea Temple, I think you can train, and I worry because when I talk to a lot of guys, they don't do what you're talking about. They don't have the time, they don't have the money, the departments I'm talking about. But there are a lot of departments that are at least trying to get that that cognitive resiliency, even baby stepping it and walking things up. But the one thing that's probably the hardest to do is replicate speed. That like Tim was talking about, see it, know it, and react to it. I think that's the one thing that has to be done over and over and over again. In the training world, it can't be trained till you get it right. It's trained till you don't get it wrong. And the breathing aspect, having taught some active shooter, it's getting guys to stay within themselves, and not. The more you breathe, the heavier you breathe, the more your brain shuts down and stops working. So the more you can, as you're going to the call, keep yourself and your breathing down, the better off you're going to be when you get there. But everybody that I've talked to that's been involved just talked about the speed at which things happen when you get there.
Yeah, I think also getting officers to understand they need to get away from preconceived notions. That the event is going to be, like you guys said, it's chaos. It's not going to play out the way you think or the way you expect. Most times the information you have, the information you've received through dispatch is not going to be accurate because it's coming in so quick and from such panic-stricken people that you really have to learn not just to react on the information you're given, but what you actually observe yourself on the actual scene and make those decisions in that quick, timely fashion based on that. But don't go into it with any kind of preconceived notions of what you expect the event to be, because now you're going to be behind the power curve trying to be reactionary.
So, I like that we're talking about training, because training ultimately, I think, is always going to be the determining factor of success and failure in that moment, right? There's not a moment where a police officer's like, oh my God, I'm now Superman, I'm Captain America, and I can do all these things that I've never done before. That's never been the case. When you look at the most elite units on the planet, from Delta Force to SEAL Team 6, the Army Green Berets, CRIF, all of those guys, they're just masters of the basics. And, when we talk about basics, we're talking about individual skills. So, when we're talking about the availability of time for a police officer, I got it. We got long work schedules, whether you're working 410s or, rotating shifts, night shifts, like how am I going to get time to go to the range? How am I going to get time to go to the gym? Let alone, how am I going to get time to go and do scenario-based real-world training? Well, figure it out. There are a ton of resources where you can go and train, but if you do this comparison of where you're looking at, elite special missions unit going in to do hostage rescue, and they're having to determine who's good and who's bad in milliseconds to take these shots to save and preserve life. The common thread is that in training, it's always horrible. They're never looking for great weather. They're never looking for a nice lawned, manicured flat range. They're not looking for, good targets that are perfectly in line. There's some training officer, an asshole like me, that has like chunky hands, and he's sitting there going like, all right, how can I make this a truly horrible experience? And then halfway through it, make it even worse, where I can just drop that warno, like drop that new little bit of information that is going to completely obscure everything that they had planned. Cool. I'm glad you guys put together a great plan, but great plans always dissolve the moment real gunfire starts cracking off. So being able to, being a training officer at a department where you're looking at your guys being, okay, what can I do real world wise to make them prepared for something that they're going to have to adapt for? Ultimately, that's creating training situations that force them to be able to adapt. That's creating situations where they don't know or have all the answers, and they are going to have to figure it out as they go. And hopefully in really horrible situations, right? Like if their hands are bloody, there's sweat and there's grit and their gear is broke and there's batteries on the ground and maybe there's some people screaming, there's some smoke going, good. Now we're getting to training, right? Like a fair weather Green Beret, he's the first guy to die. making people train like they're going to have to fight in this unpredictable way is paramount for success.
When we talk about training, I mean, because we're getting into that. So one of the things that we're going to talk about with these events is the preparation. So training obviously falls under the preparation portion. Is when we talk preparation for these events, outside of training or with training, what are some steps that agencies should be taking to ensure their officers are prepared for when these things actually kick off?
I think on a basic level, right off the bat, as part of the academy, you've got to be getting your officers trained. I'm sorry, Brian, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all right.
No, I was just saying, I think right off the bat, as part of every officer's initial academy training, you've got to get them through some sort of full-on active threat type of training, because you can't wait for them to come out. You can't wait for them to go through their first years in service, or wait for that later point in their career, because that very next day that they're out there with that field training officer, they may suddenly find themselves in that event. So you've got to start right off the bat, start building those habits, make the training effective, make it, like Tim was talking about, make it dynamic, make it chaotic, but also make it winnable. They've got to be able to succeed so that they have that confidence to prevail. But then, and this is where I see a lot of times that both officers and agencies, they do great on that aspect and get it good on the front end, but then they rest on those laurels. You've got to continue that training process throughout an officer's career, not just continuing on those basic skill sets and keeping those refreshed, but modeling new training on what are the current TTPs that are being utilized by the criminal threat or the terroristic threats. What advanced training is out there, whether it's tactical medicine or dealing with counter ambushes or exterior mobile events, like in Nova Scotia. We can't ever rest on what we've always done. There never is an end state when it comes to training. If you get to it and you say, you know what, we finally got to where we want to be, you need to get out of the way and let somebody else get in there, because you got to keep progressing with that training.
Brian, we'll cue you up there, man. It's all yours.
All right. So, and one of the things I talk about is, and I teach at the national, the down in the chamber, because if you're getting to a big ass gunfight, it's one more thing that you shouldn't have to do. August 5th, 2012 was my shooting. There wasn't a round in the chamber, not for any of us, and everybody had their TAC vest, level 4 vest in the trunk of the car. And one thing that is, and I talk about it, is simply this: well, when are you going to get it? Are you going to, you're 30 seconds away from a mall shooting. Are you going to roll up and then get all your shit out and try and put it on then? I'm with Robert. All this stuff has to be in your hands, ready to roll now. Not going to get something else, not waiting to lose sight of in the danger zone because you have to get equipment out of the truck. As far as preparation goes, to me, that's first and foremost. The other point, Robert talked about this, is if you have brand new officers that were coming out of the recruit academy who have never actually been in a fight, you need to punch them up, not in a bad way, but I always equate it to this: what happens if the first real fight you ever have is that fight for your life? You have no idea what you're going to do, no idea how you're going to react once you get smacked. So I'm not saying beat the shit out of everybody, but it's part of it. Your indoctrination has to be before you're handed squad keys and they go out on the road, because you don't get to pick when bad shit happens, But
well, it looks like we lost him a little bit there. We'll see if we can get him back up.
I was just going to say, I think Brian and I just became best friends.
I was gonna say, because that was awesome.
That was awesome. Like when you said you need to punch him up. I mean, that's 100% correct.
And go out on the road by yourself.
Yeah. So Brian, we lost you for a second there. But all these guys, you missed it. All these guys who were cheering and ranting and raving, they all want to be your best friend now because you want to mess up some recruits. So that's awesome.
But the thing is it's with love. It's not, it's
exactly. I'm not sure.
That sounds twisted. But see, I know when I went through Ranger indoctrination program, when I went through Ranger school, when I went through the Q course, I had some NCOs that I was absolutely terrified of. And, the old saying is true. I need to be more scared of them than I am of A, letting them down, and B, getting killed. And it was the fear of those NCOs and the respect for those NCOs that ultimately equipped me. So when I did see combat, it was, I'd been stressed before. I'd been beat up before. I had been in fear for my life before. And Brian hit the nail on the head. Is so many people in our society today, and I'm not going to throw stones at millennials or anything like that. It's, society is what it is. People don't handle stuff on the schoolyard like they did when I was growing up. And if somebody's going through the academy and they've never done the gravel dance, they need to do the gravel dance because you need to know what that feels like. I'll tell you what, you want to know what dying feels like is being the fourth minute of a 5-minute round with Tim Kennedy on top of you in side control, and you'll see God.
I'm good with that one. I can opt out of that.
Sorry, Tim, one thing before we jump in on this. One other thing that Brian had mentioned there, and it may have got cut off in the in the static, but he and I spoke about this at length the other day, was the fact that officers have these rifles in their vehicles, and they're not readied. They don't have a round in the chamber.
Right next to their trauma kit that they're not carrying on their person.
Right.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, we can. So two branches to go off here. One would be the continue with the training. The other is obviously, and I have a feeling I know what all you guys are going to say about having your weapons readied. I mean, when you're out on patrol, but I mean, why? Can we maybe talk about why it isn't that way right now, and how do we actually get that so that officers are prepared when they're stepping out?
I'll answer for what my agency does, and I can't imagine why anybody would do anything other than this. But our policy is, especially when it comes to our patrol rifles, is they are carried in the front of the vehicle in a weapons rack where we can access them. We do have a magazine in there. We just don't keep a round in the chamber in the vehicle, just for safety. So all you have to do is just quickly chamber a round as you exit the vehicle. But they are required to be carried up front. And we also issue trauma kits or basically IFAC style kits to all of our officers, and they're supposed to be carried on their person or at least in the front of the vehicle. And I can't imagine why any other agency out there would want to do something different than that, because it would put your officers at such a disadvantage to have to go to the trunk. Because reality, you bail out of that car in an ambush, you're not coming back to it. If it's not on your body, you don't have it.
So we have, before we step off in the military, we have these pre-combat checks that we do. It's making sure that you have good batteries. It's making sure that your radio is turned on, the right crypto. It's making sure that you have a round in the chamber. We actually have a process making sure, okay, I'm going to load my secondary first. I'm going to check all of my secondary support things like my light on it. I'm going to make sure the battery on it is fresh. I'm going to put away my secondary, right? Then I'm going to bring up my primary, make sure all my battery's good, my laser's good, flashlight's good. Then I'm going to, make sure my illuminated reticle or whatever I'm using has fresh batteries. Like those are things that we do every single day that we roll out. I'm not throwing stones, but I know that's not the case for complacency and doing the same thing over and over again. It builds complacency. And every time that you show up to shift and you don't go through that same process of making sure, I realize every department is going to have their own policy about whether you can carry around your chamber. No rifle is ever going to accidentally go off in the trunk. Like that is only going to be caused by user error. There's no accidental discharge. There's only like somebody messing up and out of ignorance shooting a round off. I can't even process like having a weapon and not having a round in the chamber when I'm at work. At home, I have a 5-year-old. I have an infant. I have teenage daughters. There's times where I might be going to the playground with the kids, and on my concealed carry, I'm going to not have a round in the chamber, and I'm going to do a Mossad or Israeli draw just because I don't want their hands crawling all over things. But when it comes to work, I think that's a battle that the officers and the unions need to fight, where they're going to be going to their lieutenant and their command and their police chiefs and saying, all right, here's the data, here's the training, here's how we're going to mitigate the risk of having rounds in the chamber, but all the way down to the academy, to your detectives and your sergeants and your watch commanders and your lieutenants. Like there's consistent training all the way up to we are ready to get into the fight. Speed, surprise, and violence of action, without a doubt, is always what determines success. But that doesn't happen accidentally. That happens through training and preparation. So you have to put that training and that preparation as commonplace across the entire force.
Mm-hmm. And if I get cut off again, I apologize. But going back to both Robert and all you guys, when I asked that question at the National Academy, there's usually between 250 and 260 guys there. Maybe 3 departments have a round in the chamber. And almost all of those are combat vets who use the same train of thought that Tim has. And while I understand the idea of an accidental discharge, I can show you the video of our firearms instructor who was an instructor for 20 years. And when the time came, got the weapon up, drop safe, click, tap, click. Oh yeah, rack. We don't do enough long gun training that becomes second nature. If you're going to make it that the in the vehicle, there's not a round in the chamber, man, you have to do that so many times. Get it out, and rack. So it becomes muscle memory. But again, under stress, people do weird and different stuff. So why give them one extra step? If you have a round in your sidearm, to me, there should be a round in the long gun next to me. It's one less step, one less thing I need to do. And again, that's just a personal opinion.
We've all seen that still picture. It was a front page of a newspaper back when it happened, and it was here in Texas, actually. There's an officer responding, and their magazine is in their carbine backwards.
Backwards, yep.
Yeah, and for a long time, people were going, "Oh, that's a fake picture. It's a doctored picture." It's not a doctored picture. The officer that was involved in that actually released a statement about how embarrassed they were about it happening. And this is we're talking about very, very stressful situations, and if you're talking about a weapon that rides in your car for 363 days out of the year and you fire it 2 days out of the year, like Tim said, you are going to fall to the level of your training. And if you haven't been training repeatedly, I hate the term muscle memory, but we'll use it because there really isn't a better one. If you haven't been training to the point of muscle memory, training to failure, stress and pressure testing yourself, so that you're doing it when your heart rate is 120, when there's sweat in your eyes and you can't see what you're doing, then you're not training realistically and you're setting yourself up for failure, because your brain is going to be on so many other things when the threat is real. Something that seems silly, like recognizing that tactile discrimination and holding the magazine in the proper direction when you insert it in the mag well, that could all of a sudden become a monumental task. So, more training is always the answer. I recognize that, hey, there's only so many days in the year. There's only so much money for every year. So it's difficult to make that happen. And I recognize that. But, what I tell everybody is a couple of things on the individual level. Ultimately, if I go out in support of one of the SWAT teams that I support and something happens to me, I consider that to be my fault because I didn't train enough, and I want to come home and see my wife and kids every night. So ultimately, I put the onus on me. But also, I think municipalities need to be looking at, let's do a hard time out and look at where we are spending money, and is the juice worth the squeeze? Because very easily, a very quiet, sleepy backwater town could become ground zero for one of these events.
Yeah, and honestly, it's usually those places that do. And I definitely don't want people thinking when I said that I don't see why people wouldn't carry their rifle that way. I was implying that I don't know why people wouldn't carry it around in the chamber. I honestly do wish, because that's of course how I'm used to carrying it as well from my background in tactical and military. I was more referring to the not carrying the rifle in the front of the car where you had immediate access to it. Mm-hmm. The argument of having it in the trunk, I have a very difficult time with, just because I see officers, in emergency situations, when they're in a rush and their adrenaline's going, they jump out of the car, they run up to the scene, and then they instantly realize, oh, I forgot something. Well, in an active threat, you don't get to go back. You're already there. You're in that fight. And so not having that rifle, not having that med kit up front, where you can quickly get to it, you might as well not even carry it at all, for the most part, because you're just not going to have it. But I think a lot of it comes back to most officers set their vehicle up for convenience. I kind of just had this conversation with some new officers the other day, trying to encourage them to stop thinking about their vehicle as the mobile office and putting their paperwork and what they want to get to the most frequently up front, and instead set their vehicle up for combat, set it up for survivability, and put those critical assets, the medical gear, your plate carrier, your rifle, that's what needs to be up front. The report that's in the back of the trunk, if it takes you 20 extra seconds to get out a report, who cares? 20 seconds on a tourniquet, 20 seconds on your rifle, that's a life.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to, Mike was on the show on my podcast a while back. We did a 2-parter on TACMed. And it was funny because I remember Mike going, he's like, I carry tourniquets all over the place. He's like, I got 2 on my person. I got 2 in my car. I got them everywhere. I
got one next to me right now, and I'm feeling pretty safe, but I got one right here.
Just in case. Yeah. So, let's start, if we're going to kind of branch into it anyways, unless anybody has any other points on what we were just speaking about. We're talking about equipment, what officers should be having with them and available to them. I think we've covered most of it. Are there any deficiencies right now that you guys are seeing across the board when it comes to readiness for these types of events, or even officer ambush events that are happening more frequently now?
I think definitely so. First off, and I think Michael definitely second this, trauma kits, medical kits. As an industry, we're getting there. We're getting better at it when it comes to issuing officers blowout kits, but we still got a long ways to go. Every officer needs to have tourniquets issued to them. They need to have blowout kits issued to them, and they need to have a way to carry it on their person. I also think that we need to be stepping up when it comes to our armor protection as well. Issuing officers, rifle rated plates, to be able to combat these shooters that are starting to use rifles. And while rifles, despite what you see in TV, are not the most common weapon used, they are used a lot. And that percentage is going up. But yet the body armor that most officers have does not stop a rifle round. And to me, that's a problem. So we need to increase the officer's ability to protect themselves and then treat themselves and others once they get into those situations.
Of course, Robert hit on what is my kind of hot button issue, as he said, which is trauma gear, is 2 tourniquets, not 1, a proper IFAC individual first aid kit. And what I advocate for everybody to do is you need to be, in my opinion, you need to be modular, which means you carry a personal IFAC on yourself, which obviously is supposed to be for treating you should anything happen to you. You put your own tourniquet on, right? and then having a larger medical kit of some kind in the trunk or in the vehicle somewhere that you can and there's a lot of great response bags out there. Some are just medical, some are a combination of medical and extra mags and things of that nature. But you need to have some type of go bag, and in that go bag needs to be the things you might need for a second round or the things that you're going to need to care for other people. And I would say, in addition, body armor, yes, huge issue. And I hear it from a lot of different departments. And I'm actually really shocked that it's 2020. And although a lot of departments are kind of catching up when it comes to properly outfitting their folks with carbines, I'm still seeing people on the news running iron sights. And, we can have the argument all day long, and there's always somebody, iron sights never fail. And, you don't have to worry about batteries and blah, 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 this, that, the other thing. I don't care. If I take 100 people to the range and I give 50 of them iron sights and 50 of them optics, and regardless of what their level of experience is, there's going to be a clear difference there. So, I think the optics question has been answered. Iron sights, of course, are always going to be needed for a backup. But, if I go into every gunfighter wants an edge, like they said in Josie Wales, and I want every edge I can get, that's why I don't need to, you can see I'm not wearing glasses now. My vision's a little bit off. When I go into a gunfight, I'm wearing corrective lenses because I want to see everything in crisp detail, because that could be the difference in, 400,000th of a second that helps me get the drop on somebody. So we need to be out, that needs to be in the budget, not just we're going to buy X number of carbines, we're going to buy X number of properly outfitted carbines. That includes enough magazines, that includes assault slings, that includes optics.
To me, it's personal accountability. It's pure and simple. If I put a slide up at the end of my presentation and simply says this: it's your life, own it. If you aren't good with your gun, get to the damn range and be better with the gun. If you're not good on the ground, go on to be good on the ground. But more than anything, you have to understand your own shortcomings and your strengths and work to those. We ran a match. It was a scenario-based training up in Michigan, and I watched a kid with his duty rifle with optics at 25 yards, and he couldn't put down a 6-inch blade with a full mag. And I asked him, I said, "Did you just take that out of your squad?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, this is mine." I go, "But if that was someone being held hostage, good grief, you'd hit everybody else except the bad guy." And I said, you can't have that. And it come game day, there's no excuses. That there's a mag backward. I meant to zero that. It still comes down to personal accountability. Have you, and like Tim said, man, you're not pulling out some fucking crane technique that you never used 10 years ago. You have to go with what you know and what you do best and use it over and over, so it's second nature. And I apologize for cursing, but I got shot in the head. I forgot to.
How dare you?
Okay.
I was sitting here. I was joking. It's funny that you said that. I was like, there's probably with the 4 guys that are on here, and I'm taking myself out because I wouldn't put myself in the caliber of any of the 4 of you, but I'm pretty sure there's no weapon system in the world that I couldn't put in one of your hands and you couldn't hit a 6-inch plate at 25 yards. So I'm
a little confused by flintlocks, I'll be honest.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. I think that makes a lot of sense. What you guys were saying there. Before we kind of switch tactics and start actually talking about these incidents and the tactics behind them and those types of things, is there anything on what we've spoken about so far that you guys still want to touch on?
I think Brian hit it on the head when he talked about accountability. You can call it standards, you can call it accountability. But I think as both officers, as individuals, we have to learn how to enforce personal standards on ourselves. Never resting on our own laurels and always striving for better. And then as agencies, as an industry, I think we need to really start enforcing higher standards and expecting higher standards, not just of our individual officers, but ourselves as an industry. in order so we get those better officers, those higher quality officers that we're looking for that are needed to go into these kind of situations.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's say we talk about some actual tactics when it comes to these types of events. Now, there's a lot of different events that we can talk about, a bunch of different scenarios, whether it be schools or places of worship, mobile threats. Is there anyone that kind of jumps out at anybody as to something you want to talk about, or something that you've thought about recently?
I'd just like to point out the variety that these are taking place. Places of worship happens all the time. Hospitals, schools, nightclubs, work Christmas parties, marathons, Marine 5Ks. The commonality there is that there's lots of people. That there's not much else that is similar about any of them. I think Brian was saying it. When you don't get to pick the where, the what, the when, the why about any of it, right? You don't get to pick when you're going to get in this gunfight. You're not going to get to pick why you're in this gunfight, why this bad guy is there to do this thing, what kind of weapon he's using, what kind of equipment he's going to have. You're not going to pick when it's going to happen. Ultimately, you're just going to have to be ready for that. That's a big thing to bite off, right? You're looking at this gigantic elephant of these unknowns, like this massive creature. Like how do I prepare to consume this? And ultimately it's just one bite at a time. So as an individual officer, it is the individual's responsibility to be ready for all of these different circumstances. I'm looking at some of these questions and guys are saying like, it's really difficult with admin or like with policy or with whatever. I promise every single person on this panel, we would go to your department and fight with you alongside you to change whatever policies in place, right? Like I have a group of experts that work for my company that will write whatever needs to be written and have whatever lawyer needs to look at it to make sure that it's approved. So when you walk into that, that sergeant or that commander, lieutenant, or the captain, all the way up to like a sheriff and say like, hey, here's the reason why we need to change this policy. No, we do not need to have a 25-pound trigger. No, it does not make any sense that we're going to have red dot sites, or that we can't have red dot sites, or that we can't make modifications. Whatever the dumb policy is, you're going to have the intelligence to go in there and make that fight and be able to prepare as an individual for whatever is going to happen. Because that police chief is not going to be there when the 911 calls and you're going to roll up on scene. First person that shows up, you're going to go in and try and follow the sound of that gunfire. So you're going to have to personally be ready for that.
I kind of want to echo something that Tim had just mentioned when he was talking about, the individual officers taking that initiative and, not just to change policy, but it's more than just taking the initiative to change policy as well. The excuse of, well, the department or the admin doesn't let me do it. For some things, the department and the admin has a lot of influence and control. But when it comes to your personal readiness, your personal training, the excuse of, well, the department won't pay to send me to this class, or my agency doesn't offer this class. Well, quite frankly, stop being a bitch and open up your wallet. It's your life. How much is your life worth? Stop making excuses. Take that initiative for yourself, your partner, your family, your community, whatever it is that you find that's important, and take that initiative. And I think that's something that we really lack as a law enforcement industry here lately, is officers willing to take that personal accountability for their own training.
So, how do you get a department, how do you get a command to agree to, like, this sounds like a lot, right? How are we going to add scenario-based training, force on force training? How are we going to have somebody that's going to be able to go to a school and talk to the principal and see if we can use that school as after school hours or on a weekend location to conduct training in response to it. One of the best things about law enforcement is that you're working in a designated area. Like, you can look at Mike Simpson could take out a map. You could look at the map of where your area of responsibility is, and you could identify a lot of potential targets. You could look at a lot of soft targets. You can say, like, this school or this hospital or this church or this synagogue or this mosque. These are all potential targets. So why don't I contact these places and see if we can do training there? And if I have something that precludes me policy-wise that's prohibiting me from doing that, okay, first fix that policy. I never had that advantage, right? Like, I have to drive down some stupid ass road and deal with a bunch of dudes that I've never met in an area that I've never been with, working with, like, side by side with a bunch of guys that are probably terrorists themselves. And then boom, bad things happen. I have to go kill a bunch of people. So, like, that sucks. But imagine having the opportunity where you already know where you're going to potentially be in a gunfight. Like, you have the advantage of familiarizing yourself with every single dark alley, with every single synagogue, with every single mosque, with every, you have that advantage. You just have to do the work. And it doesn't have to be just you, like your entire shift or, that entire district, whatever it is, but you're going to have the creativity and ingenuity to be like, all right, where are we going to train this week? What are we going to do to get out of the box and get better at what we do for a living, which is protecting and serving?
Yep.
I think that's a really interesting point too, because there's going to be definitely probably a hard time for some people to get into actually these buildings to do training, depending on what they are. But we have tabletop exercises, right? You can get the plans for the buildings, and you can walk through TAC plans for the entire thing. So, is that a viable strategy for those agencies and officers that maybe don't have physical access to those buildings?
I think it's definitely better than nothing. But I think you'd honestly be surprised, like Tim's talking about, if you actually would just go and interact with those organizations and locations in your patrol area, you would be very surprised at how many of them would be willing to open up their doors to allow you to come in and train. I'll be completely honest. That's how we do a lot of our stuff, is we just reach out to businesses or locations. If we say we want to do some active threat training at a college, I just start calling around, and I pick one of the colleges that we want to use, and I go make friends with them and then ask them. And, maybe there's a little, quid pro quo involved where, hey, we'll train some of their school security officers or whatever in the course of doing that as the compensation for allowing us to use that location. We'll allow their people to participate. But you'd be surprised at how many businesses or churches or schools are more than happy to open up their doors, because it only helps them, and they recognize that. And that's how you need to sell it to them.
I'd be interested to know.
All right, go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Brian.
One of the things that we did when I was with the SWAT team is that's one of the training days. We would send two of our scouts out and go to businesses that were open and say, hey, can you just give us floor plans? Or but just like Robin said, bad happened here. We want to get to you the quickest. Is it okay if we come in, even if you close? Just come in with a camera, and we just want to video the inside, so you have a better understanding if you do have to do something. That information is out there. Most places are not going to tell you no. You're at City Hall. You can get those. It's binders of buildings. If a little bit left the center and has some wild ideologies, man, we'd write those floor plans up just so we know if we got to come back. This is what we know what we're getting into. So that the more knowledge you have going in, the better off you're always going to be.
I will say one of our big successes when it kind of comes to that here in Memphis, one of the things that we've done is with trying to get officers familiar with their locations is we've kind of partnered with all the malls here inside the area. And I encourage, other cities to look at doing this. But we'll go in like on a Sunday morning before the mall opens up. And and the mall will bring all of its stores in and its employees in, and they'll open up the mall just as like the mall was actually open. And then we create a scenario inside of the mall, and this allows all the mall participants to get training as to how they would react if there was a situation. And then it allows us as law enforcement to practice responding inside of those big open areas. And we integrate fire. We get multiple police agencies involved. So it's not just our agency. We get all the agencies throughout the entire our entire metropolitan area. We invite them to come participate. We get all the fire departments. We've even gone as far as actually evacuating patients to hospitals so that the hospitals could practice their triage. And all of that takes place by just a phone call of just reaching out to those people. And we've had tremendous success with it, where it's almost become a quarterly event for us here inside the city. I say that, but we haven't done one in a while because of the whole COVID thing. But it's become a very reoccurring thing that we do to try and increase that training for ourselves and the community.
Yeah, Mike, you had something you were kind of cut in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd be interested to know the numbers. I think I have a pretty good idea what they are. That most areas, police officers living and working in that area, even if they have school-age children, probably don't know. I know, my own. I have one of my kids is in college, but my son who's in middle school, I'm only familiar with a couple of areas of his school, where I've gone to see, band performances and things of that nature. So, and most people are probably in the same boat, and that's even if they have a kid going to that school. So I think a great idea is to walk those schools. We know that schools are considered a soft target. This has been shown multiple times. The number that always gets brought up, the number that strikes fear in the heart of anyone, is when you hear the word school shooting. So we need to have people out there walking the ground, knowing where the entrances are, where the exits are, where windows you can get in and out, where a blind hallway is, a stairwell, a door that only locks from one side, a janitor's closet, whatever it might be. And I do agree that I think it should be done, like Robert was talking about, it should be done on weekends. I know there are concerns in some camps about, if we do this type of thing, it's more than a double-edged sword. It's kind of a triple-edged sword, right? So it's not only helping us, but it also possibly could be helping the future shooter. We know that. And it also could be affecting some of these kids. They're basically pushing them into living in a state of heightened awareness that some feel is not ideal. So rather than even have that conversation, I think it's something that should be done on weekends. And with schools, it should be no question. I mean, these are public buildings. So this should be walking down the hallway from your office to somebody else's office, or picking up a phone and saying, hey, we need to take our team out to the middle school this Saturday. We need one person there to open it up for us. And we're not going to do anything but maybe move in through the hallways, move through the stairwells, but kind of see where our blind areas are, where we would be most vulnerable, how we would choose to approach that. Get in that second story window and look at where the parking spots are and see where your team would be vulnerable moving up to that building. Did we lose the moderator?
I think he said he was going to step off of the stream for a second to try and speed it up a little bit. I guess we were kind of getting a little skippy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Mike, like you're talking about, getting in and going to those schools, you've got to reach out to those places. You got to build those relationships. If you're a law enforcement officer and you've got a patrol zone, a ward or whatever you want to call it, mm-hmm. and you don't know the administrators of the schools and those high risk areas that are inside of your patrol zone, you're not doing your job. You should already have a relationship with them. Otherwise, you're just not going to be effective.
Right. And this, I mean, the moment that you have to respond to that location in the heat of the moment, and you're running up, you're going to be looking for someone that you recognize, and and hopefully that principal, that vice principal, that administrator, whoever it is, has come out to meet you. You already know each other, and you can do a quick rundown, and you need to know if he says, we think it's over by the ag building. You need to know where he's talking about. This can't be okay. Where's your ag bill? Let's get a map out. Let me turn my phone on and show me. No, you need to know. The ag building's over here. The metal shop's over there. The locker rooms are over this way. And have a good idea. Walk through this on your own and think to yourself. Put your demon hat on for a minute and think, if you were the person trying to do evil there, what would you look for your egress route? Oh, I know there's a wood line right there with a road only 50 meters away, so it's plenty obscured. I can park a getaway vehicle right over there. These are all things you can war game in advance. And like Tim said, this is an advantage we didn't have. There used to be, back in the lean training days in the 90s, when we didn't have the advantage of training on one target and then actually doing a full mission profile on a real target, right? We didn't have that advantage. So typically what we would do is we would do a walkthrough and then a blank fire, and then we would do a live fire exercise, but they were all on the same target. And that was the running joke, because we used to go, remember, when we do this for real, we're not going to get to walk the same piece of ground. I mean, it literally got to the point that you were like, okay, there's the exact corner that I've sprinted to 5 times, right? So and then, okay, covering fire. Now I'm going to go here, and there's the window that I've been through 5 times, right? Well, you have that advantage, unless you're working statewide jurisdiction, you have that advantage.
Yes.
You can go anywhere in your city, anywhere in your county, and you can figure out, if I had to respond to this movie theater, this is where I would park. That's the entrance I would choose to go in. Here's where I would try to get people out to set up a casualty collection point and a good egress point for the friendlies. You can do all this, and I know everybody's got other stuff going on, right? There's not an unlimited amount of time in the day, but I think we live in an age where these types of things have to be a priority.
I agree. And just like you were saying, that there's other stuff going on. I think officers need to realize that they try and rely on their training officers so much. Well, they've got other stuff going on too. They can't do every single scenario and every single type of thing that you want. That's where you've got to take that personal initiative and get out and go to those sites yourself. There's only so much that one-man training shop or that 5-10 man training shop, depending on the size of your agency, can do. They're overburdened just like everybody else.
I'm looking at the comment section. I just want to give Patrick Welsh a huge shout out for referring to the Carver matrix. That's something I haven't heard. I'm a former 18 Charlie, and that's something that I haven't heard in a while, but Patrick has kind of hit the nail on the head. You need SWOT analysis. You need Carver matrix.
Yep.
These all need to be things you need to be working in. You need to have what we call a red hat guy. You need to have red cell planning. It needs to be in everything. Also, want to give a shout. Jim Breedis is in the comments section, and he's my boss at the Center for Tactical Medicine, so I want to give Jim a shout out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Adam's coming back. I'm sitting here looking.
Yeah, right here.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there he is.
I tried to figure it out, and then I lost, and then we lost.
Like, well, we've just taken over, so it's going to be our show now.
That's all good. It's okay. Mike is more than versed in hosting stuff, so he's. I was like, it should be okay for a second.
I don't think I've ever had more than a guest at a time now, so that was a little different.
Pop your cherry. It's all good.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I was listening to some of this conversation as I was getting all this stuff done here. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting when we talk about working with other agencies and other departments, and I know we're going to get into this when we talk about kind of post-incident and incident command, but when we're talking about working with other police agencies, or like you guys had said, maybe it's the university or college police force or security force or things like that. I mean, is there where do we need to start drawing? I mean, when we talk like military, we have NATO standards. But with policing, are there standards? And this is just a question for myself because I'm not familiar with the way it is in the US. Are there standards for police agencies to kind of all work off the same systems, whether it be with communications, so that everything gets switched onto one net? How does all that play out in a situation like this?
There are some standards. I wouldn't really call them standards. There are recommendations. The FBI, when it comes to active threats, is considered to, within the United States, is considered to be the lead agency. And so that one of their tasks several years ago was to establish a federal training standard or model that was going to be pushed across the United States. Now, again, it was a recommendation that they're not coming to, every department and saying you will do X, Y, and Z, or, we're not going to fund you or whatever. But as a result of all of that, and them wanting to create this kind of universal standardized model to recommend throughout the United States, an organization down in Texas called ILET, Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training, was brought on board with the FBI. And they, for the most part, they're kind of considered that, at least that baseline level of this training standard that needs to be done for responding officers. Communications, medicine, things like that are a little different than that. But on the basic response level, that ILET program is considered to be that kind of baseline.
Oh, Brian's back.
It's killing me, man. It's killing me.
It's all good.
I would say, so this is kind of along the same vein. This is a little bit of an offshoot of exactly what Robert was just saying, but and kind of dovetails into your question is, we know that there's a battle with standardization, and as Jim said in the comments, in Texas, ILET is the standard, right? But standardization can prove difficult because this is, none of us are autonomous. Sometimes we're talking about interagency stuff. There's depending on where you are and who you work for, there can be multiple layers of red tape, multiple layers of bureaucracy in trying to get on the same page. But it is something that everybody should strive for. We also know that a lot of times what ends up happening in incidents like this is you end up with, and rightly so, you end up with a lot of agencies working together that might not necessarily work together. And I know that's how it was at the Fort Hood shooting. That's all of a sudden a lot of people were working together who weren't necessarily working together. If you have any questions on the recipe or how to liaise with other organizations, with other departments on the fly, I would highly see, if you're in an administrative position, reach out to the Secret Service. In my opinion, they have cracked the code better than any other organization. And they're not going to give you any TTPs, but kind of giving you the outline for how they liaise. Because if you think about, they're in the business of protection. When you think about the president, the vice president, and dignitaries traveling around, they're having to interact with multiple agencies, and they have a checklist, and they've got it down pat when it comes to how they're going to identify who they're working with, who they're going to be doing that face-to-face with, how they're going to conduct communications, how they're going to conduct vetting, and everything of that nature. So anybody who has any questions about that, in my opinion, that is the expert organization. That's the subject matter expert to reach out to.
I want to talk about standardization for a second. Now, it's a huge benefit, right? Where every 5.5 millimeter, where I say, Mike, throw me a mag, and he throws me a mag, and I go to work, and things are fantastic. Or frequencies across the line for everyone in a given area. We can go to whatever channel, and it's prescribed, and we already have that crypto or that fill so that I can talk to whoever, whether it's EMS and fire or federal or state, county, local. I got it. There's also every single place in the country is way different. So somebody working in Montana is going to have a way different situation than someone working in Miami. And somebody working in Miami is going to have a way different problem than somebody working in Chicago or Los Angeles. So when we have this dumb acronym from TC, and that's we're going to evaluate how we're going to set up a mission. So when we're building our the concept of operation, and how are we going to get from one place to another, and how we're going to get mission complete and a successful mission, we have to look at every place that we're working, all of the different factors that are going to influence what we need to do and how we need to do it. And sometimes we have to do that differently. Like, I don't get to use a minigun and a 50 cal when I'm having to go downtown Baghdad. Sometimes that's a really great thing to have, having close air support, being able to just wreck an entire area. Like, obviously you're not going to have that. So standardization is great, but I really want to keep harping on the training of the individual officer regarding the specific area that they're working on and the threats that they have to be prepared for. The most likely threat, the most dangerous threat.
I love what Tim said there, and because it kind of tails into the next topic, which is going to be actually when the officer arrives on scene, what steps are they taking? And there can be a lot of debate, and I'm sure there will be here, depending on the circumstance. Should a single officer ever engage the suspect?
Yes.
Okay. Single officer. Should you wait for a partner? Should you wait for a team? I mean, you hear a lot of different things from a lot of different places. So let's talk about it.
Can I tell a story?
Who's got the story? Tim?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
The story is they're almost identical, and they're about 6 weeks apart. And they're both in kind of this rural area in the Middle East. And the first time I'm sitting I'm in an observation position. So me and my sniper partner, we're watching what's transpiring, and just we're looking for somebody specific, but we're not allowed to do anything. And I watched the Taliban in Afghanistan, obviously, walk into this village, pretty much rape and murder everybody. I mean, no problems whatsoever. It was horrific. I just sat there and watched. 6 weeks later, in another village in the kind of the middle of nowhere, I thought I was going to have to relive this exact same episode play out in front of me as the Taliban's cruising into this village, and they're like, yeah, here's another one. We're going to recruit. We're going to get a bunch of young, military age boys, anywhere over the age of 11. All the women that are, getting up to puberty, we're just going to go ahead and snag those. All the ones that are post-puberty, we're just going to rape those. And all the old men, we're going to kill. And they're cruising in, and an old grandpa. I mean, this dude, he looked like he was 90. Obviously, you age different over there. He took a muzzle-loaded rifle, a freaking musket, right? Like 1776 musket. He walks out, and he cracks one round off. The Taliban, like a fart in the wind, they all break. They looks like they're going to totally break contact. He is sitting there loading another ball down into his powder musket. One other dude comes out, shoots another round from what looks like an AK from the Korean War. So there's two dudes in the village with a gun. The Taliban turned around and ran. So what can one person do? One person can change the course of everything. One person, no matter how badass a dude thinks he is, the moment that a round zips past your head, I don't care how tough you think you are, it's going to change a man, right? And when you've been walking around a bully your whole entire life, like the Taliban, like an active shooter, like all the little, evil pricks that are out there that want to go hurt innocent people, they've never really got shot at before. So one officer that's taken the responsibility, the onus to realize that eventually he's going to be the dam holding the entire water back from all the innocents behind him. That one dude is going to save countless lives just through the fact of a little bit of violence. A little bit of violence goes a really, really long way. The more violence you got, the better it turns out. But to answer the question specifically, one dude, go.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think you look at examples You can say Arapahoe, Colorado, the school shooting there. Did that single officer make a difference? Hell yeah, it did. Trolley Square Mall, Utah, single officer off duty made a difference. And quite frankly, you want one of the best examples of a single officer making a difference in an active shooter. Ask Brian. I mean, that's the example right there.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, we haven't had a chance yet. Would you like to maybe share your story? What happened with you and how that whole event played out? If you don't freeze. Oh no!
While we're waiting for Brian, this was about 4 or 5 months ago. There was a guy in a tactical vest. He had some magazines racked up, and he was running up, I think, to a bank or to a government building. He shot some rounds in through the door, and all of a sudden, somebody shot back, and it looked like his gear was exploding, running off of him as he was like throwing his stuff. His gun's like dangling behind him before somebody shot him dead in the street. But it took like just a couple of seconds for somebody to be like, dude, that dude's shooting at me. Boom, put some rounds on target, and that guy, like the coward he was his fat white butt was trailing down the street before he eventually died. I can't remember the specific example, but I mean, it's perfect, epic illustration. What happens when you put rounds on target?
Looks like we lost Brian.
Lost Brian for a second. That's okay. We'll get him back.
I mean, a solo officer by themselves, they can do so many things. They can isolate a shooter just by engaging that shooter. They may be able to keep them pinned in an area where they can't get to additional victims. They can distract the shooter. And the reality is, and this is uncomfortable for a lot of officers to kind of make this jump. But if the suspect is shooting at me, then he's not shooting at those innocents. That's a success. By keeping him distracted with me, it's buying those victims time to get out or to fortify themselves or for other officers to get in. So I can isolate him, I can distract him, and honestly, I may be able to neutralize him. That single officer may be all it takes in order to take that threat out. So in so many instances, that single officer can make a difference. But I do think that officer needs to make a decision before they go in. They need to look at the whole situation. If backup is pulling into the parking lot, backup's 10 seconds away, is there an advantage to waiting, working together, forming a team? Of course. If backup is 45 seconds away and you're hearing shots fired, you got to go. So there's a lot of decisions that need to play into it, but I would never, ever take that off the table for an officer to go in by themselves.
All right, Brian, you think you can give it a shot?
I'm going to try.
All right.
All right, so August 5th, 2012, my off day, because my name's Murphy. It's 10:25. First calls come in that there started out as a fight at the Sikh temple. And then shots. So long story short, I'm the first guy there. As soon as the call comes out, I know where everybody is, and I know it's gonna be mine. So from being there before and knowing where the temple is, it's set off the roadway so far that from the main thoroughfare you can't even see the roof of the building. So it's hidden pretty well. And so when I get there, pull in, look left, right, everywhere, don't see anything, and I don't hear anything either. So I jump out of the car. There's a body in front of me, obviously deceased, and then the guy comes out the front of the building and starts running away from me to his right. Anyway, I level up on him. I don't have enough to shoot him. I can't see anything in his hands. It's not that odd for somebody to be running away from active shooter incident. So I just yell, police, stop, and then all of a sudden his gun comes up. soon as I see it, boom, we shoot. This is 40 yards. He's running, one hand behind his back. Hits me right in the face. Bullet goes in, goes down my throat, rips it up, hits my spinal column, bounces, and it's still in my trap. Felt like getting a good punch. And luckily for me, I grew up in Brooklyn in the 70s, where everybody threw hands, so it wasn't that bad. Anyway, there's a car there. Get next to the car. While I'm getting cover behind the car, he actually stops and comes back, flanks me. I'm behind the car for about 10, 11 seconds. Step out in the front because I wanted to get off the X. And it turns out he's about 10 feet to my, if you think about it, the clock, he's about 7 o'clock. Next round comes, shoots my thumb off, shoots the gun out of my hand. Long story short, he just keeps shooting me. And at that point, my backup comes over the top, sees him. And this goes back to me, this goes back to a lot about your mindset. A lot of people like to be in the game, and I don't want to say game, but want to be in a law enforcement community. But if you're going back to this and you're honest about things, there's going to come a time that you may have to pull the trigger. And if you're not ready for that, I don't have a problem with you leaving law enforcement. Don't feel bad, but just understand that there's too much at stake for this. And fortunately for me, Sam came up 33 seconds later after jerking around with the trigger, pops him in and puts him down. Now, the reason why this is timing is everything. I was there from the first dispatch to my arrival was 1:59, which is like crazy short. But what had happened was he had shot a bunch of people on the north side of the building and had just walked into the kitchen area where there were 15 women and children hiding in a pantry. So he had seen 3 of them who tried to shut off the stove, shot at them, missed. They ran into the pantry door and closed it. And when he went up to where that room was, that's when he saw my squad come. So it is all about timing. And if it's not you getting out and being that first person on to make something happen, if I don't get there when I do, those 15 people are going to be dead. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So in a nutshell, he had killed 7. It was 6. And one of the people who got shot just died in December from his injury sustained. So he killed 7 and injured another 2. But we went back to it, and my department trained a lot. I mean, a lot. And when we do an after action and things weren't where we needed them to be, like, level 4 vests and helmets were in the trunk. The next day, everybody had them in the front seat with the post, just because we realized that that's unacceptable. If you go into a gunfight, you should be able to have all your gear when it happens. So that's the supremely nutshell version of this. But I do want to make one remark on this, which I think is important, especially with Mike, and all 4 of us have been in the service. And there's a lot of guys now who are coming out of the service who know tactics, who have their own TTP. So you have to be planning that your adversary is as good, if not better than you, because if you underestimate them, man, sometimes that's a fatal mistake. Understand they know what we do, how we do it, and it's at least an even playing field, if not obviously a favor to them, since they know what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and how they're going to do it. And the one thing that I haven't talked to the people on the inside of the temple, the one thing that I drive home, he was never once upset. even while he's shooting me, I'm looking at him, and he could have had a ham sandwich in the other hand, because that's all that was going on. And understand that when we get there and you're all hopped up, who makes better decisions? The person who has a plan, sticking to their plan, or us getting there being, upset and trying to get things done and thinking outside the box and all that. So understand that portion of it, that not every active shooter that you're ever going to deal with is a maniac. There are people out there like Nova Scotia. That was a methodically planned attack. So you have to be prepped for that as well. Hopefully all that came through.
Yeah, I kind of want to have you stop because you're coming through really clear right now. So,
Okay.
I don't know if anybody picked up on this. That was the first time I've heard your full story. What I took out of that was you equated getting shot in the face to being punched. So I don't know. I think you've now taken the list for the toppest son of a bitch that I know. That's oh yeah, it's just like getting hit in the face. Yeah, okay. So I think that says a lot about mindset there. So that's awesome.
It says a lot about who he's been hit in the face by too.
That's true.
Yeah, no doubt. Are there any points from that anybody here wants to touch on?
Just real quick, like I talked about, I mean, obviously Brian is the amazing case of how that officer can make a difference. I've known Brian for several years. I've taught his case study in almost every active shooter class I've done because of how significant it is. But I think I wanted to touch on when I talked about how the officer has to make certain decisions. I think it's important, whether it's a single officer or whether it's a team of officers, they really need to look at and decide, is this a push or a hold kind of situation? Sometimes, charging in and rushing in may be the exact wrong thing to do, or holding short may be also might be the wrong thing to do. So we really need to look at, is the risk worth the gain? And what I mean by that is, our lives being lost right now. If we show up and we're hearing shots and we know there's victims in there, that's a push, right? We need to go. But if when we show up and we're by ourselves and it's just deathly quiet, and we don't really have anything driving us saying that there's shooting going on, you need to wait for backup, because there's nothing really pushing you to go at that point. And I think a lot of times we kind of get wrapped around the axle of, well, a call has to be a certain thing, whether it's a barricade or a hostage situation. We do like a traditional response where we're waiting for SWAT or tactical teams and waiting for negotiators. That's a hold. But then when we start hearing gunshots inside of that situation, if it's like a hostage situation and we know there's people in there and we're hearing shots fired, that just turned into a push. And so we need officers to make that decision. You know what? I may not have all the resources that I want in place. I may not have the tactical team. It may only be me and my partner, but we have to go. We have to go right now. So it's imperative that officers really start to understand what defines the criteria to go, and which ones define those to hold still and wait for those additional resources.
You got four guys here. I'm taking myself out. Four guys here who know so much about tactics. And when you talk push versus hold, do you guys want to roundtable that? I mean, there's obviously going to be a little bit of a difference between what, the two of you guys have done in the special forces arena versus some of the law enforcement type training. So is there a real discrepancy in tactics? Or is it everything kind of starting to come together now and everyone's kind of doing the same stuff? Tim's,
yeah, it depends.
Yeah, it depends.
It depends. There are certainly similar. There are certain principles that are certain principles.
Yeah.
But it's so. I guess we could put it this way: is tactics don't change, but ROE impacts tactics, right? And obviously your ROE in San Bernardino is not the ROE in Paktika, Afghanistan. We're talking about a different ROE there. So I think that's more than anything else, that's what's going to dictate. And I think at times, there's an old saying, "He who hesitates is lost." And it's if in the middle of the night in a combat zone somewhere, surrounded by guys that I've been working with for 2 years who would lay down their life for me and I would do the same for them. If I make a snap decision in a quarter of a second that's wrong, yeah, I'm going to get called out for it. But it's a little bit different from making the snap decision in broad daylight with 20 news cameras on you and a body cam on you and cell phone cams on you and everything else. Ultimately, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. I'm not going to deny that. But I think because of the age in which we live, everyone who is carrying a badge and a gun is worried about the court of public opinion, is worried about how this is going to play on YouTube and on social media. Just yesterday, I saw footage of an officer subduing a young man, and there were some, they were grounded, and there were some strikes involved. But you're seeing the last 30 seconds of what was about a 5-minute interaction. So we don't know what came before that, right? And this is, everybody I know who wears a badge when they go to work every day, this is something that they're thinking about. There was never a time that I had to worry going in a room in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else that, if it came to whatever with somebody in that room, from over my shoulder, somebody was holding a cell phone chanting World Star. I never had to worry about that. So it's a little bit different environment here.
Yeah. Lost Brian for a bit there. I don't know if I want to give Tim the floor on this one, because
I can tell you from experience, he's got a lot to say.
We got time, so we might as well hear him out. That's the whole point of this. So,
without I've been fortunate because I've got to go to some of the most elite schools for counterterrorism and hostage rescue, but those tactics have been proven and battle tested over time, and through hundreds, if not thousands, of real world hostage rescues and direct action missions. That training is available to law enforcement, not just from me, not just from the Mike Glovers and course of actions, or the Kyle Lambs, or the John McPhees. I mean, there are hundreds of guys that have left the war and want to pass that information on to officers here. And some of them are doing it for literally just to put enough food on their table so that they can keep doing it, so they can put gas in their car and they can get ammo and go to the next place. Having John McPhee, I'll use him as an example. He's done so much on range, from Delta Force to the CRIP and SIF of Army Special Forces, that now there's a weight on his soul to go and train as many people as he can here. So there's not an excuse if I'm a hairy-handed, scarred-up troll, and if I can go here in the United States to classes every month, and I argue that I work more than any police officer out there. I get it. You're fighting for those overtimes. Mike knows I have a schedule that is unlike very few people on this planet, and I still make it to training courses. And we're talking, like, I keep circling back to the individual soldier or the individual officer, and how it's the onus is on him to be able to be prepared for these situations. When I have people show up to courses and within 4 or 5 hours, they're stopping, they're like no longer sweating, and they're about to be a heat casualty. These are police officers that have only worn body armor for like 3 or 4 hours, and they're about to fall over because they're not used to the temperature and the humidity and having to run it up and down the range, and things that are pretty commonplace. That's normal. I've actually gotten used to seeing these people show up, and I kind of just grab by the scruff of the necks and be like, shame on you. I'm going to call 911, and you're the person that's going to show up to my house to come save my family. I've had people try to break into my house at 3:55 in the morning with a weapon, like professional criminals. And when I dialed 911, nobody came. So that onus is on the individual officer, and then that individual shift. You have to go to the smallest unit and look at the failure point there before you start going up gradually to where the larger problems exist. Like when you look at the individual and then the collective group, and then from the collective group to that shift, and the shift to the department, and the department to, like, you can start identifying problems all the way down to the individual, and the individual can fix those. And that goes to preparing and goes to training. And that's not to just keep saying how heroic Brian is, but when you hear his story, that there was a condition there. There was conditioning that had happened a long time before he got in that gunfight. And that was, he had been hit before. Like, how many officers current day know what it feels like to be hit? I'm not talking about getting shot in the face. Thank God, a few people get shot in the face, but where they are in pain, like, I know there's unions where, like, if an officer is like, oh man, he got hurt in training, he's going to have to take 5-6 months off, and make sure that guy gets some good paid leave, like, knock it off. You volunteered for this job, and that is what this job is. This job is pain. This job is suffering, and this job is being prepared to be ready for when shit hits the fan.
That's as succinct as you get it. It's we talk about, is it a team thing? And I was listening to a podcast, and I'm sure you guys know Jocko. Mm-hmm. And Jocko was talking about that whether you're the police chief or the brand new guy, it's still your responsibility to be the best you can be. That everybody needs to take that bull by the horns. And part of my thought process in all of this was, when I woke up and after all the operations, I was on the table for like 13 hours or whatever. And my thought was, I still was worried about my guys. Was everybody okay? This what worked out? Because I had been in pain before. I have I got 4 titanium screws in my back because I have a double level fusion there. My knees, my shoulders. I mean, but I always learned. I mean, everybody talks about it, but it's real. If it didn't kill you, then what are you bitching about? Because I look at myself and I'm like, I got 2 bullets still in my head. I talk like a flipping gangster muppet. But the truth of the matter is, I'm here. I can laugh. I can eat. I can spend time with my family. Man, if you don't do this right, if you don't practice it, train it, you don't get to go home. And that's not right, because when you stick your hand up and you swear you're going to uphold the law and the Constitution, those are all great things, and they're all real things. But you have a responsibility to yourself. You have a responsibility to your children. You have a responsibility to your family. You have a responsibility to a lot of people. And if you look and like you guys, you're out training, and you look at people and you're like, dude, you are 150 pounds overweight. That's bullshit. I'm sorry. It's Plain and simple, that's bullshit. And don't tell me what doors you can knock down. And I was a tech guy. If you're 350, if you get knocked down, it's going to take 3 people out of the game to drag you. So now we're down 4. You have to be responsible in your training and your physicality. And there was a period in my department where we just didn't have a lot of money to go out and train. So what we did was you trained at roll call. You trained on shift. You brought guys in. Sundays usually were semi-training days. Not everything has to be about money. Dry fire your gun, take it apart, do it. Just keep putting mags in your gun and dropping them so you're under stress. You can get the mag in the gun without fiddling it apart. All those things and again, I hate using the word they. Well, they won't give me the time. They won't give me the money. I'll always fall back to it, man. It's your life. It's your life. How much is it worth to you? I watch guys. I hate wearing a vest. Well, why? And they're uncomfortable. Really? I'd rather have a freaking rash than a bullet hole. And again, it has to go back to the individual officer always, because 5 individual, you get the old diamond formation. There's still 4 guys. There's still 4 individual people with responsibilities to everyone there. And, the weakest link, it still makes you, the strength of your chain. So I'm with Tim on that. You gotta man up. It's every day is Cowboy Day. Cowboy that shit up.
I would kind of like to go back to the original question, where we were talking about military. Do the military tactics apply into the civilian sector? And Mike had brought up the term of principles or techniques and tactics. I think principles are universal, right? They apply in any setting. Tactics are more mission dependent, and so we can, as law enforcement, we can look at the way the military does things, because those principles, those tactics, those are battle proven. They've been tested and they've been successful, and we can look at those and extract what are the principles out of that. But we also have to look at how can we change that tactic, because what works downrange for the military isn't necessarily going to be applicable in a law enforcement setting. It holds a lot of influence. The principles are there, but we have to figure out how we're going to adapt that. Law enforcement, just as an example, law enforcement doesn't get the ability to do suppressive fire. Right? We've got a lawyer attached to every bullet. And we just don't have that amount of rounds on us. I mean, you're talking, usually less than 50 rounds, per pistol on a given officer. So just as a single example, the principles of that, of finding a way to keep an adversary pinned down, to give you the advantage to tactically maneuver, the principles are sound, but we have to look at the specific tactic and say, how can we adapt that within our resources, our legal requirements, within the law enforcement setting. So there's definitely a lot of cross comparison, but it's not straight across the board.
Yeah. Right on. All right. Well, here's the thing. I want to give you guys a quick second to run to the washrooms if you have to. We're almost 2 hours in, got an hour left. One of the things I want to do is do the let everybody know that. So I did a little bit of a giveaway prompt at the beginning of this. So I've decided I've gotten all the people that have submitted that are listening to this live. Everyone who's submitted live, I've done a review of the podcast and screenshot it, sent it to me. All of you, I'm going to send these books from Gavin DeBecker and then our IRT shirt. So I'm going to send those all out to everybody, so you all win. What I'll do here is I'll pop myself up so these guys can run to the washroom if they want. 2 other quick things that we were doing is the tactical gear giveaway winner for the month, and then also our instructor of the year nominee. So what I'm going to do is just real quickly here, I'm going to take a look. So the tactical gear giveaway winner is, I'm going to bring this up right here. So B. Wallace. So I don't know what your first name is, but Mr. or Mrs. Wallace. I'm going to be reaching out to you very soon, and you're going to get that gear bag from LA Police Gear worth over $400 worth of tactical gear. So congratulations to you. And our Instructor of the Year nominee this month is Mr. Lon Bartel. So I know Lon works with Vertra, but you know, he's I got this email, this beautifully written email from his staff and some of the people that he's instructed. So I've received a few emails about him. And so he was the one that we've selected for the Instructor of the Year. He's been an LE instructor for over 17 years. He was one of the founding members of the Arizona Tactical Officers Association. And he continues his mission to save lives via the use of simulation training technology and training with Vertra. He was the International Association Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training. He won awards from them. Just all in all, a fantastic instructor, a fantastic trainer. So I'm honored to nominate Lon as one of our Instructors of the Year. So he will be put into that draw coming up. So congratulations, Lon. All right. Well, let's see who we have still in the thing here. We lost a bunch of guys. So, well, it's just Robert and I for right now. Goodness. There we go. 3 of us right now. The other 2 boys are still in the washroom. So, so guys, real quick. I mean, we've talked a lot in the first 2 hours here. Is there anything that we've talked about so far that you want to talk about some more before we start talking about kind of post-incident and those types of scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Brian, I don't want to jump in and overtake. But I wanted to just kind of address, because I know a lot of this is geared towards law enforcement officers that are working in a training capacity, and how can they be improving their training programs? What can they be doing to provide better training for their agencies? And I think one of the critical factors is, we need to start thinking out of the box when it comes to training. We've gotten so locked into the traditional mindset when it comes to active threats of these are going to take place in a school, or these are going to take place in an office building. And historically, yeah, that was true. But if you just look at even the current data just out of the last year, we only had 2 school shootings last year that were considered active shooters. Workplace violence is down. So we really need to start looking at, where do we conduct all of our training sessions at? We need to start looking at the new threat environments, open area type of assaults like Nova Scotia. We've got to get to where we're focusing on what the current TTPs are. We're not, in my opinion, I don't think we as law enforcement are adequately addressing things like the Las Vegas kind of situation, or even what do you do in a Walmart, a giant open area.
Yeah.
And I think as a trainer, you've got to get out there. You've got to start looking at, how can you get out of those, what we traditionally would consider an active shooter environment, and get into those new threat areas, because that's where the fight is. It's not in the schools anymore. I'm not saying they don't happen. I'm not saying get away from it. But looking at the numbers, the schools aren't the leading location. The office buildings aren't the leading location. Those open retail establishments, those parks, those roadways, those public events, those public venues, concert halls, nightclubs, that's where the fight is happening now. And we have to start addressing our training, our tactics, the locations, all of that to meet that new threat.
So let me ask you something quick, Robert. In that same vein, if guys are bringing long guns to that fight, how proficient are most officers at any kind of distance?
Okay.
Right?
All right. So one of my jobs is I'm the lead rifle instructor for our department. So I have to phrase this carefully. At distance, it's going to vary based on department, obviously. So I would give the "it depends" answer, but I'm going to say not proficient enough. I think most agencies do not spend any significant amount of time with their long gun at distances exceeding really 50 yards.
Yeah.
And while that's great for conventional law enforcement shootings, again, I'm data driven by nature. I look at statistics. Most law enforcement shootings, even with a long gun, they're close in. Most police sniper shootings under 100 yards. So, is there is the likelihood of them having to take that long shot as high as them having to take that more close in shot? No, but you certainly can't remove that from the training. And I think that's where a lot of departments, a lot of agencies are falling short. And I think that there's a lot of crutches that they use or excuses. The reality is most police departments don't really have the capacity resource-wise to train at extended distances. Most agencies don't necessarily have long distance ranges that they have control over. So they have to think outside of the box, build relationships with neighboring agencies to do that. And that takes extra time and work and effort.
Sorry, I'm sitting here shoving food in my face. Remember the first time I got to go to Sephardic, I've been to Cephalics, so Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat School, and then Special Forces Advanced Target Exploit. I don't even know what the acronym stands for, but we're doing like lots of CQB, lots of room clearing, a lot of kind of like force on force assaulting. And I remember the first time getting shot at. And I was like, man, that dude is really far away. I was like, the last time I got to shoot at somebody that far away, I mean, it had been a minute. And that's in the military. And that was in Iraq. And then kind of, I got to go to a couple of different sniper schools. And then I end up in Afghanistan. And every single engagement was by design kind of outside. Thank God they weren't smart enough to realize that they were shooting at special forces guys. They're just kind of at regular military people. And they thought they were outside of kind of our effective range. Standoff is one of the greatest things that we should always have. Standoff is that you can engage an enemy at a greater distance that they can engage you. The difference between those two things, so like if somebody's shooting an AK-70, an AK-47, so 7.62 by 3.1, right? They have an effective range of 300 meters. We, shooting 5.56 out of our M4, we have an effective range about 600 meters, right? So the delta between those is our advantage of being able to kill them further away than they can kill us. That goes all the way back to the Chinese being like, all right, we're going to use arrows, and we're going to use cannons, and we're going to use muskets, like the ability to hurt somebody before they can hurt you. Why would we never have that advantage? I mean, that blows my mind. When we're talking about an officer being able to, take a shot with a rifle at 50 meters, going all the way back to the North Hollywood shooting, where the equipment was the limitation, and then the training was the limitation. Like it took a couple of guys to be like, we're going to have to roll up on these guys and shoot them underneath our car because they're just eating us up. That should never happen again, right? If you have a rifle in your truck, you need to know how to use it. At the distance, the limitation of that rifle should be your limitation. I am not joking you. I'm not like bragging, but today I'm on a walk with my friend Dakota, my friend Shane and Brandon. We're up in the hill country of like kind of far northwest Texas. And we get up on top of this rise. I have some green tip in my rifle, and I have a 1-to-6 power loophole scope on there, suppressed. And we have a target that was like just a little over 600 meters away. First shot, round on target. That is not extraordinary from where I came from. That's commonplace. And that should, while that sounds like, wait, 600 meters with 5.56, yeah, man, that is the capability of that bullet. And if the bullet and rifle is capable of doing that, the limitation then is just the shooter and how often he trains.
Mm-hmm. I think 600 meters would be hard pressed to find in an urban environment that happening. But I mean, we talk about here in Canada. I mean, some of the shootings that we've had involving our RCMP officers have happened with long rifles at distance, and so that's it's definitely something that needs to be thought of and trained for sure.
Yeah, there's multiple scenarios in Texas where you could definitely run into that. You know, whether we're talking about some type of whether it's a domestic in a farmhouse somewhere that's gone bad, a meth lab, whatever that might be, you could very easily find yourself having to engage over open ground. And like Tim said, you need to be as competent as your weapon system allows you to be. And I would, you know, earlier I talked about iron sights and, you know, the debate of iron sights versus optics. And I'll take it a step further. You know, Tim mentioned he has a 1-6, and I have several ways that I approach it. This wasn't something I thought of in my younger days, but as I got older and as my vision was affected, I really started to look at magnification more and more. And my thought process has always been, you know, like Tim said, I want to be able to engage them before they can engage me. And I want to be able to see them before I can even engage them. So I'm a huge advocate of having some type of, whether we're talking about a 1-6, a 1.5 to 8, or whether we're just talking about a flip magnifier, which is what I'm running on my SWAT gun now. You need to have the ability to see people a little bit farther. And, you know, Brian brought up an excellent point. You know, when you arrive on scene and you first see somebody, you might see they could be dressed in any fashion, right? Having a little bit of magnification could be the difference between knowing whether that's a gun or a cell phone in their hand, between whether or not they're wearing, that guy appears to be dressed like one of our SWAT guys. And then I've got some magnification. No, wait a minute. That guy's uniform is all wrong. That guy's carrying a weapon. That guy's carrying an AK. We don't carry AKs. So having a little bit of magnification can be that difference. So I'm an advocate of that as well. And you need to, you know, it's especially if you're using a flip magnifier, you know, when you're going room to room, you just don't use it. It's out of the way. And if you ever need it, you need it. And it's there. And it's always better to have and not need than it is to need and not have.
Yeah. I would really want to pound that point home by Mike there. Like, we do not want to get in a gunfight that is fair, right? Like, this is not and a tumbleweed rolls past us and like, ready, set, go, right? Like, I want 20 on 1. The dude is asleep in his bed, and like, we're gonna throw a flashbang in him, and that's the end of the gunfight. That sounds like perfect ideal. Obviously, that's not always the case with our ROE, but I'm exaggerating slightly. Like, we need to have every single possible advantage: training, equipment, rest, physicality, our physical training, right? All of those tiny little things add up to success and failure. So, like, when we're just going to look at training, or we're just going to look at equipment, or we're just going to look at the individual, you know, if whether it's like a heavy set officer that chooses the donuts over, you know, going and having like a breast of chicken that he cooked before in his meal plan and brought to work with him, where he's going to swing by McDonald's and grab some food or some In-N-Out instead of packing a nice, healthy sandwich. You know, to a super simple decision is that, all the way up to like, what trigger can you put into your rifle? What sight can you put on there? Are you going to have magnification? Can you have magnification? Can you have a red dot? Like, every single possible advantage that we can have, we need to have, because I don't want to get a fair gunfight. You know, where we don't just have the advantage of our offset, where we don't, you know, if you look at the Dallas shooting, a lot of police officers got shot there. A lot of well-trained police officers got shot there. There were great distances. We're talking, you know, multiple city blocks. You know, there were clear shots of a couple hundred meters that the bad guy was taking. So we don't want to give them any of those advantages, because they're gonna be able to pick the when they're gonna do it, the why they're gonna do it, what they're gonna use when they do it, the reason why. Like, they're gonna pick all of that stuff. So why would we ever relinquish the advantages that we get a choice in? Like, if we get to vote about something, if we're gonna have a choice, Like we have to have every single possible advantage, and training's one of them, equipment's another one. But then the individual kind of state of readiness is a big piece to that. So like totally agree with you, Mike. Just really want to hammer those points home.
I think everybody keeps kind of talking about this in the context of exterior, outside of buildings, making approach, rural area. It's important to remember too, long distance shots, even if an officer is sitting here thinking, I'm in a tightly dense urban area. Well, go inside of one of your high schools and look at how long those hallways are. You may be making a 150-yard shot inside of a building. That is conceivably possible. You go inside of some of these, concert venues and arenas and things like that, you're going to be making extended shots, even inside of a dense urbanized area. So it's imperative that we look at what can that rifle do? How far can it go? And how to employ it, because I don't think agencies are doing that.
And also from a training perspective, and I'm sure everybody on the panel can attest to this. If you can hit a target, the aim small, miss small is what we always say, but we don't really see the practicality of that necessarily in the shoot house. You see a cardboard silhouette with a bunch of holes in the torso. If you're accustomed to engaging targets between 300 and 600 meters and shooting effectively, kill shots at 300 to 600 meters, then all of those principles of marksmanship translate into what you're going to do at 5 to 15 meters in a room somewhere.
Great point. Before we move into kind of the last phase here, and it's in my mind, I was like, could we talk tactics and all that stuff? It's going to be very difficult, obviously, just in this platform to kind of talk through tactics of engaging shooters and things like that. So I'd like to move on and kind of, as we get to the end of this roundtable, start talking about when does the situation change from being an active shooter once the suspect is either killed or they're taken into custody or controlled in some way, shape, or form, and then moving into kind of the post-incident casualty care, setting up primary, secondary, tertiary treatment points, and all those types of things. So, maybe an overview of that, better than what I can do, would make sense from one of the guys. But can we kind of transition into that portion?
Yeah, I think some of that can actually even be happening while the event is going on. Especially, I think Mike would definitely echo this with his background in tactical medicine. You can have multiple things going on simultaneously. You can have contact teams inside of a building and dealing with a shooter and maybe isolating them in a particular area. And behind them, you can have rescue teams or evac teams, creating casualty collection points and starting to extract some of those wounded. A lot of that can actually happen during while the event is maybe playing out.
The sooner you can start that, the better. I think Boston's a really great example of seeing both failure and success. With the Boston bombing, they were preparing to go and drive all the way up to New York and hit Times Square. There was conflicting information from both local, state, and federal authorities about who was where, who it was, what was happening. And that's a really great point. Like before anybody was in custody, they were already, obviously triaging on scene. They were already creating massive command centers to create, maybe for the East Coast at the time, that was one of the largest manhunts in law enforcement history to happen. And, nearly putting in martial law so that they could start narrowing down who these people were and where they could be going. We have really clear structure on the military side in command and control. And when things go bad on target, we've rehearsed what we're going to do in I mean, almost every imaginable way. And we kind of make this assumption that, and Mike's gonna, I'm sure, second this, that we're bad at everything and that everything will go wrong. Like we're not good operators. We're not good planners. We're not good at medicine. Like there's not an element about what we do that we consider ourselves masters of. So then when something happens, we just have to fall back to our training. And when we start falling back to our training, that means that our training has to be capable of supporting what's happening in that moment. And, so whether you're driving down the road and the car in front of you blows up and then the car behind you blows up and now you got 10 dudes that are screaming, you know their kids and you're there for their baptisms and you've been, teammates with them for like a decade. Like that's a pretty rough day and you're still getting shot at. Well, cool. We've trained for this. And if that's not in place where you can fall back to, like, you don't get to make it up as you go, where, all right, I think we're gonna put a command and control here, like maybe we use these frequencies, like maybe this might work. You're gonna have a pretty rough go at it. That plan has to be perfected, but no plan is good until it's rehearsed and practiced.
I absolutely agree with that. And the thing I want to flip this around for the TAC Med portion is, so I'm on the NFPA 3000 committee trying to get a standardized response with the fire department, but I haven't gone out and seen what's going on. We're getting much better at a standard. I have a rescue task force and casualty care where that everybody knows where how to set things up, but we're still not there yet. To me, that's probably the one area. And yeah, we do beat the hell out of each other and say, no, we're not good. But I think that's probably still the area that needs a tremendous amount of work is having a concerted response. We were fortunate. We were the first department in Southeast Wisconsin to have a TEMS unit. So having them on board with us was great, because right after they Sam put the guy down, and this goes back to what Robert was saying, it went from an active shooter to now we don't have anything going on except a lot of false information about other shooters and whatever else. But we took our timing and cleared from there. But you still have to get guys, even with our TEMS unit, which had been on for a decade. Now it's real, and real is different than it's still a little bit different than training. So when they hit the first victim, they immediately started to treat, and they were doing a great job. But you had to remind them, hey, they got to get out. We had the Bearcat outside, and move on. So from the next aspect after the shooting's over is getting people healthy, getting them out and getting them treated. And to me, that's probably the one area, again, that needs the most work, is that coordination between multiple disciplines.
Yep.
I think just to, I don't know how my sound is. I had to basically take my pods out because I was having some sound issues, but Brian makes some excellent points there. And I'm a little biased, right? Because that's my bread and butter, is the tactical medicine portion of it. So I tend to be more analytical of that. I have more expertise in that. And I do find that a lot of agencies, that is the weakest link in their chain. We're getting better, but I don't think, I have yet to see anywhere that can 100% look me in the eye and say, yeah, we're absolutely where we need to be. And it's challenging. One of the things that I tell everybody, and there's a Adam, I think you and I have talked about it before. There's a little bit of a schism in the TEMS community, that there's the RTF community on one side, that we're going to do everything in an RTF format, and then the other side is the integrated TEMS, for lack of a better word, right? So TAC medics that are directly assigned, and there's within those two, you have multiple ways to skin the cat on both sides. But I think regardless of what format you're using, regardless of what you're invested in, I'm not telling anybody that they need to stop and do 180 degrees and switch one way or the other, or do it this way in any manner. the key, I think, is all of the principles that apply to the tactical aspect of it. If you didn't have tactical medicine involved, pressure testing, realistic training, repetition, training for worst case scenarios, training on the ground where you're most likely to fight. All those things apply. And then I would take it one step further. I would say a big hindrance to the reason a lot of these municipalities haven't caught up to where they should be in TEMS is because it's not integrated enough in the training. And we've found this time and time again at all these incidents. If the tactical component is not accustomed to training with that RTF component or that integrated TEMS component, when they show up, they just look at it. Imagine, if you're in a military scenario overseas somewhere, and as you arrive at the objective, somebody else who you saw 4 months ago arrives at that same objective and says, "I'm going in with you." Of course, you're going to say no, and that's what ends up happening. Is at the time everyone gets underutilized because they haven't been properly integrated in training. They don't understand capabilities. They don't understand SOPs, TTPs. So all this needs to be worked out in advance. And the problem that we run into, of course, is most places, your medical assets are typically working under medical direction, typically under fire, right? So and they've got another job to do. They're firefighter paramedics or dedicated paramedics. So they have a whole nother job going on. But what's really important, and I think a lot of places in Texas are doing a good job of this, is when it's time to train, they are present at training. And that's whether they're allowed to carry, whether they're sworn. Aside from all that, those are separate debates that we can have. They need to be integrated in the training, in every aspect of training. And that way they're going to get utilized when the time comes, and they're going to understand the tactical environment. They're going to understand what they can do in a care under fire phase and in a prolonged field care phase. And yes, I recognize in TECC, we don't necessarily use those like we do in TCCC, but I think it's really important that they need to be integrated. And if anybody out there who's watching this, if you're a leader, if you're an administrator, if you're somebody calling the shots, you need to be banging on somebody's desk to make sure that the assets that you're going to use when the time comes are training with you every time you step across the line and start a training event.
I'm actually going to kind of jump on one of my personal soapboxes, kind of a little bit based off of what Mike was talking about. And that's exactly what he's talking about, that integrated training, those medical assets, you have got to get them into your training program. So often we see law enforcement training, we see fire department or EMS training, and every once in a while they'll come together and do a joint exercise. That doesn't work. You've got to be integrating those assets, both on your tactical side and your medical side in every situation that you do, and even expanding it out past that, even within the tactical side, getting your neighboring agencies, getting your support agencies involved, because when that event does happen, it's not just going to be your agency that's responding to it. It's going to be your neighboring agency. It's going to be your federal agencies that are in that area. Well, if you're not integrating them into your training as well, you're also doing yourself a disservice. So integrated training covers a lot of different things, but specifically on the medical side, you've got to always integrate those. Now, I'm gonna argue just one little point that you brought up, where you talked about either doing the RTF model or the tactical medical model. I don't think it's necessarily a pick and choose. I think you can actually do both. And I think it's a good idea to do both, because on the tactical medical side, on a SWAT team or on a tactical team, I want to have dedicated medical assets available to me, integrated on the team. But on that first responder level, on an active threat kind of thing, those assets may not be immediately available, and the situation may exceed the scope and capability. And that's where that rescue task force is so critical, being able to get them on scene. Because let's face it, the average response time for a tactical team is somewhere between 30 minutes, 45 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark. if you're waiting 30, 45 minutes to get your rescue medical assets into a scene, then you're costing people their lives. You need to be integrating those regular frontline EMS workers into your training, because you got 20 minutes or less to get that initial medical on scene, get them into that crisis site, and start that point of injury care. I don't think it's a one or the other. I think it's a both that need to happen.
No, I agree with you. I think there is a both aspect there. And the biggest, I've been accused in the past of being anti-RTF because that's not how my experience has leaned, and that's not how I operate now. But I'm not, and I've actually do work with some agencies that we do have both. Is we have integrated medics with the teams, and then we have an RTF element, indirect support, that's going to take care of transport and everything else. And I think that's a great way to go. I think the biggest problem that I've seen with, when I argue, I don't want to say against RTFs, but when I kind of point out one of the flaws in what happens with RTFs is the opposite of what Robert and I are talking about happens, is tactical commanders get a little bit too comfortable saying, we used to call it in the medical asset that I worked for in JSOC, we used to call it behind the curtain. Like there was this magic curtain, and tactical commanders could just say, well, it's all behind the curtain there. There's this magic thing that's going to happen. That's just that's taken care of. So I don't have to, I can concentrate, specifically on breaching and bullets, and I don't have to worry about that. And that's when you're going to run into problems. You never, if anybody is listening to this, if you're somebody who's on an RTF, you never want to say to a tactical commander, mate, I got you covered, man. Don't worry about it. You need to be planning together. As you need to be training together, and maximum integration needs to occur, because the tactical guys need to understand the medical piece. The medical guys need to understand the tactical piece, because that's the only way that you can mutually support one another. And another huge problem that I think a lot of agencies run into is they get really caught up in pushing. We're going to push medics forward. We're going to push physicians forward. We're going to push PAs forward, whatever it might be. So we've got it covered. I love when I'm working with organizations like that to kill their medical asset in the first 10 minutes. And then I find out that this high-speed medical asset that's been with this team for 2 years has never bothered to train any of the operators in TCCC techniques.
Yeah, and I'm definitely a huge proponent of using dedicated medical assets on your team versus taking an operator and putting him through a medic school and calling him a medic. I mean, because the reality is, if I've been shot or you've been shot, who do you really want working on you? Me, who's a shooter by trade, but went through a medic school at night court,
right?
Or the actual professional medic. That's who you really want.
Well, it's
plugging that hole.
I could take out your appendix. I could do it. I'm confident. You don't want me doing it.
Yeah. I tell my students that all the time. I'm a medic. I'm great at plugging holes. I suck at IVs. You don't want me to go down this road.
Right.
So I want to go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
It's a funny story with that thing you just brought up. We had just started the Thames unit. There was a Hardee's restaurant that went out of business. We were using that for practice, and so we were doing an officer down thing. And I said, all right, when we go in, I'm going to get shot in the leg. And so we do. And then we go outside, and my two Thames guys were there. And I said, well, what would you do? And he said, well, the first thing we do is we put an IV in. I go, well, you have 30 seconds to get that done. And they're like, what? And I go, 29, 28. I wound up with a freaking hematoma on my wrist. They couldn't hit shit because they just never did it in that that type of environment. And then once we got it all done, I said, but you can't. When we do trainings, we're doing it to be as realistic as possible. And you should at least once in this, training environment, stick somebody with a needle just so you know how to do it. Not everything is going to be in the rig. Not everything's going to be pretty, but you need to make sure it gets done. And going back to the RTF thing, though, I kind of look at it this way. We ask every police officer out there that they're going to be their own SWAT guy walking in to any active shooter incident. Why would you not train every fire person out? Like in my jurisdiction, our fire guys are our EMS. But why wouldn't you have them, getting, when you're doing, interdisciplinary training, get them involved? Like, you may be the first rig on scene where it was, a call of a domestic that someone got hurt and they're already there. They should know what they're doing, or at least understand the concepts behind it.
I want to ask a question, and I'm going to go throw a grenade in the room, and then I'm going to run away. When we have these active shooter incidents, most of the time, is there a tactical officer that's the first officer on scene, or is it a regular patrol officer?
It's a regular patrol officer.
So here's my question. What level does that officer, and I kind of have an idea because Mike and I talked about this already, but we talk about TCCC and medical training that every individual officer should have. What level does that need to be at? Because, like you had said, it could be 20, 30 minutes before a tactical team even rolls to the location. That incident is going to be over. They're going to be triaging, could be 10s, 20, 30 people, could be children. What level do they need to be at and be ready for when these incidents occur? Who wants to tackle it, Mike?
TCCC is the gold standard. That's how we do in the military. And regardless of whether you are a cook, a tanker, a cannon cocker, or an infantry guy, you are doing TCCC as a minimum. So that's why I think every patrol officer needs to be trained to the TCCC, TECC standard. Period. No excuses. That it is what it is. That's what it needs to be. I think above and beyond that, when we're talking about entry teams and everything else, I think, as Robert said, we need a legit paramedic. And then I do think it's a good idea to have operators who've been trained to the Ranger first responder level, the what we used to call the combat lifesaver level. I think some places still use that term, or even EMT basic, whatever that might be. And really, to the point that those are the individuals that, if nothing else, I don't have to point and go, hand me that. No, not that. That. No, not no. Left. That. Hand me that. I can say, hand me the sternal needle, and they're going to hand me the sternal needle. So I think it's important to have, just like I think a kit should be modular, I think your training should be modular. And that first guy that shows up, who might just show up by happenstance, needs to know how to put on a tourniquet, put on a chest seal, pack a wound. Needs to do some level of cursory triage. And I have a triage course that I teach that can be taught to the individual patrol officer because it's simple and it's accurate. Then operators, I think, need to be trained to a higher level because they're going to be in more high-risk situations. So they should have somewhat higher level of training, maybe carrying a little bit more comprehensive IFAC. So, I'm in favor of paramedics teaching operators who they've trained properly and hopefully taken to a cadaver lab of doing things like needle decompression and things that are a little bit more advanced. And then the paramedics, if you're going to be a tactical paramedic, it needs to be within your scope of practice to do things like, finger thoracostomy, crikes, things of that nature, things that are a little bit more invasive for the situation that you're going to find yourself in. That's what I advocate. And I had something else I was going to say, and it kind of escaped while I was saying something else. So,
make the green grass grow.
I think definitely every police department needs to be integrating some sort of TCCC into their academy. Every officer graduating the academy needs to have that as a bare minimum. So at least something to that standard. Yeah. Because again, you never know when they're going to need it.
That's 16 hours every 2 years.
Yeah.
That's 16 hours every 2 years. So that's, I mean, you can break that up into 2-hour blocks. If you break that up into 2-hour blocks for monthly training, you're actually going to be training sooner than that. So, and I don't think, asking somebody to do 16 hours, dedicated 16 hours over the course of 2 days together in the police academy. I went back in the 80s, I went to the corrections officer academy, and we had an entire day of first aid that, looking back, was pretty much crap. So, today you could use that same allotted training time plus another training day and train somebody up to TCCC standards. And I think that's totally what needs to happen. And people need to be outfitted, like Robert's talking about, and like Brian and everybody has said, everybody needs to be carrying a proper IFAC and know how to use everything in it.
Yep.
I have another question for everyone. Precursory exposure to trauma for officers, having them go into potentially a hospital environment or something where they have exposure to actual trauma, because when you arrive at a scene like this, and I know Mike and we'd spoke about this before, but we even put this together. You may be responding to an active shooter incident at a school, and now you have dozens of children who have been shot or killed, and now you have immediate exposure to that. Do you want that to be that officer's first exposure to that type of trauma, or should that be kind of built in prior to that happening?
Well, it's exactly like what the example Brian gave of, we need to smack people around in the academy, right?
Yep.
So if we're going to smack people around in the academy, and I advocate that, then they need to be seeing some blood at some point too. Now, logistically, how to tackle that, I don't know. I mean, that's challenging.
No, it's not.
But they don't necessarily have to be treating anything. I mean, it's sending them to a level 1 or even a level 2 trauma center for a couple of night or evening shifts just to see what goes on. That's when I did a little bit of unauthorized moonlighting when I was going through the SF medic course. A bunch of us got bored. We decided we didn't want to see fake trauma. We wanted to see real trauma. So we volunteered to start doing some shifts at the old BAMC ER on the weekends. And my first Friday night there, I saw 3 gunshot victims. So, that was a great baptism for me. By the time I saw my first gunshot victim that I was taking care of, my responsibility, nobody looking over my shoulder, which was less than a year later in Bolivia, it wasn't the first time that I'd seen it.
You can get really creative, not to make us sound like the souls inside of us are all dead, but we've bought dead animals, or I don't think it's a secret that we do live tissue training in the military. So we have goats and have sometimes a myriad of animals, and sometimes they will dress them up, put clothes on them. So when I run into a scene and I'm planning to do this big badass DA hit, and then they're an asshole like Mike Simpson standing there, he's like, "Hey, that's one of your teammates right there, and there's a gunshot wound to the lung." And I'm like, "Oh, there's an actual gunshot wound to the lung on that animal right there. I have to go treat that." So live tissue training is a problem. That doesn't mean that you don't go buy a chunk of brisket and show somebody how to do real wound packing. Like that, you don't go and go to a butcher and buy an entire dead something and put clothes on it and have your officers run in and do real stuff with that thing. Whatever the limitation is, you can be ingenious enough to overcome those limitations to provide real world training. You have to train how you fight. If you think that you're going to run up onto a school where there's a bunch of kids that are shot, and all of a sudden you're going to be this amazing hero that can save all these kids' lives, you're an idiot. I was 18 years old. I'm an EMT firefighter, and a church van full of women and kids rolls over on the side of the highway, and there's 15 kids just strewing across the highway. And I didn't know my ass from the sun at the time. And I remember trying to save one and then trying to save another. And, Tom Moy, the paramedic, coming over and putting his hand as I've been working this kid for a while. And he's like, hey, I got this one, just move on. He was essentially just triaging the dead kid I was working on. And that, to a degree, we had never trained for that. Like I didn't know what to do. I'd never worked on somebody that small. Even in the fire academy and EMT school, you go through like child CPR, you like child Heimlich, but like having to hold a tiny little face in place so I could figure out how to do an airway. Like you have to train for that. I'm not saying to go into a hospital or and get used to seeing kids that are hurt. I don't know what the benefit is to that, but being able to train as realistic as you possibly can, so when it does happen, you're ready for it. That there's only one way to be prepared, and that's to prepare.
I think there's tons of resources with moulage kits. There's different cadaver labs. Get with your local health science college. They're always, have access to medical training aids. For civilian law enforcement, live tissue labs, not realistic for us. We're not going to go out and shoot up a goat. But having access to all those other things, that is extremely realistic and plausible for us. And definitely is something that we can take advantage of and use that for valuable training.
I'll go one step further on this. You can have people come in out of the academy that the only trauma they've seen is in a Hollywood movie and have no idea that a gunshot, the entrance wound is based on the round, can be like insanely small. So, I agree. The more exposure you have to things, and just get to an ER at a recruit school, in recruit school, and I like that brisket idea. But to just so you know, hell, you should know how to shoot a piece of brisket just to see how much damage it does. But we're not always exposed to the things we need to be exposed to.
I think it opens up a bunch of topics, that we've just exposed here. As far as creating scenarios for anybody listening to this, you guys have given some examples, but creating like larger scenario-based training for agencies and working jointly with the fire departments, with the paramedic services and things like that. Is there any really good examples of training that you guys have seen that you would suggest that a trainer or an agency watching this kind of goes out and takes a look at?
I know Virginia has had a lot of success with doing large-scale agency training. My own agency, we do it extensively. Aurora, Colorado is actually another good one, obviously, after the Aurora shooting there at the Century 16 Theater. They spent a lot of time doing interagency training. A lot of agencies in Texas have done it as well. So there are certainly a lot of good examples that are out there, but it's not as complicated as people really think. All it is really making some phone calls. Now, you've got to be careful when you start doing that kind of training. You need to know what you're doing. There's a lot of resources that are out there for instructors to learn how to develop large scenarios like that. Homeland Security on their website has some good examples and some good online courses in how to do scenario development, how to do AARs. FEMA has a lot of those same resources. Those are good things to pull from because you really want to make sure you're doing this the right way. You want to make sure that you're not creating training scars and then you're not just going out there and just turning it into just a giant free-for-all where it's not productive. So it requires a lot of planning on the front end, a lot of research, and a lot of work by the exercise planner to put it together, to bring all of those different components in. But it needs to go beyond just your agency. Get your neighboring agencies involved, get your fire EMS involved, get your community counterparts involved. If you're going to host this at a mall or a school, get them involved. I mean, who better to be the role players for your exercise than the actual people that live or work in that environment? And that gives them training as well, so that they know what to do if there's an event at that location. To get them involved, get the FBI and the other federal agencies involved. And actually the FBI brings a lot of resources to putting those kind of exercises together as well. That they spend a lot of time on that. So that there are a ton of resources that are out there to do that.
The one place that is sticking on what Robert said, the one place to absolutely look at is your emergency management coordinator, because they have funds that comes in because they need to practice in order to stay funded. So, and that's where you get the federal in, and you get a lot of other agencies that you wouldn't think of. I mean, we did one, and we used to not be my city is a suburb in Milwaukee County, and for the longest time we weren't able to speak on the same radio frequency with Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, which we border. And the funny thing was, we did a thing with emergency management. They brought ham radio operators, which you would never think to bring them, but these guys took 2 radios, plugged them in, boom, we were done. Nothing else was needed. They could do it all for us. So there's a lot of assets out there. And I agree, FEMA has a ton. I was the program coordinator for our department. So they have just tons of scenarios, but you can't overthink. Initially, you can't overthink it. Just, to get everybody to play nice together should be your first objective.
Yeah, and keep your scenario simple. Don't overwhelm yourself by turning it into a World War III scenario. Keep it simple, keep it realistic, keep it achievable. You're going to get more participation, and you're going to learn more from it.
We're kind of coming up to the 3 hours, so I'll say this. I say this to everyone. I'm around, so if you guys want to kick after 3 o'clock, that's totally cool, or the 3 hour mark. But I want to respect your timings, and I appreciate you all being here. So I kind of want to open up the floor to the 4 of you. Is there anything that was talked about that you want to go back to, or that we haven't talked about that you wanted to bring up for this talk? So maybe Tim, I'll start with you.
No, thanks for putting the panel together. I really want to hammer the onus comes down to the individual. I'm a 40-plus-year-old hairy-handed ogre. There's not anything special about me. There's not anything special about Mike. There's not anything special about anybody on this panel. There is just a choice that is made every single day, and everything that we do about what we're going to do with our time. I'm sure video games are cool. You don't get better at anything doing them. I'm sure that donut is delicious. It is not going to help you chase somebody down. There are a lot of great things to do with your time, and make sure you're being very strategic about how you're spending your time. So thank you very much, everybody that is out there protecting us. And my heart's with you, and keep hammering, get better.
Yeah, Tim, where can people track you down? Should they go to Sheepdog Response, or where's the best place to get a hold of you and get some of the resources that you guys have available?
Yeah, hell is a really good place to find me. Me and all my minions trying to figure out how to do damage. Sheepdog Response is great. I'm on Instagram and all the socials, Tim Kennedy MMA. But Sheepdog Response is, that's my program, that's my training cadre, and some of the greatest guys in the world I get an opportunity to work with there.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Robert, is there anything less that you want to talk about?
Yeah, just kind of highlight, what I was just talking about, kind of with those scenarios and the integrated response. As law enforcement officer, trying to prepare your agency and prepare your officers for an active threat, don't forget about integrating all those outside components. And the one section that I oftentimes see overlooked, don't forget about your community as well. Get out, integrate into your community, get them prepared. get out and provide training and resources to the different organizations that are in your community, because it's a partnership. It's not just law enforcement versus active shooters. The best thing we can honestly do is prevent these events from ever taking place in the first place. And that's really getting that community involved, teaching them what the warning signs are and the behaviors, and then what to do with that information so that hopefully we can stop these kind of events from ever taking place. And then also focusing on, okay, if that didn't work and the event takes place, getting your officers to the best capability possible to deal with these active threats, teaching them how the right skill sets and the right tactics to overcome what is truly the absolute most convicted of all threats that law enforcement is ever going to face. And that's these perpetrators that are doing active shooters.
Absolutely. Mike, any last points from you, brother?
Yeah, just to hit on the points that we made time and again, and Tim already emphasized, personal accountability is hugely important. And I would say if you're somebody that that maybe that's a weak point for you, I'm not going to be one of those people that goes, all right, you're not doing it. You don't do a good job of making yourself do it. Then you need to find another line of work. I recognize that sometimes that can be difficult because there are other things going on in life, but you need to recognize that this is a priority. And if that is a problem for you, then you need to find a tribe that's going to help you do that. And I tell people all the time, and Tim knows when I was still working with Sheepdog on a regular basis, I would say at the end of every class, if you're the toughest one of your friends, you need to go find tougher friends. And I encourage everybody, they need to find friends that are going to keep them accountable. And I can do a pretty poor job of it, to be honest with you. But I have an app on my phone that every time I work out tracks my heart rate. And on that app, I am friends with everybody in my tribe. And I know that even though he never tells me he does it, I know that Tim Kennedy scrolls through it. And I know that if I miss more than a couple days of working out, he makes a face. And then he's going to tell me about it the next time he sees. Yep. See, he's looking at it. Yeah, that's my last workout. So, and I know he and I have never talked about this, but I know he goes, let's see what Simpson's doing. Okay. Because I'm going, let me see what Kennedy's doing. So, find people that are going to keep you accountable. And they might not necessarily, if they're not people that you know and work with, then do something like that, or get in a social media group where people are going to dog each other out and keep each other accountable. And then the other thing that I would say is know your job, know it inside and out, be a master of your craft. Okay. Know what your limitations are and know what you're expected to do in a given situation.
Awesome. And I forgot to ask Robert, but Mike, where can people find you and track you down?
Yeah, if there's anything that I can do to help anybody out, law enforcement instructor, anything like that is got questions about how to build their program or how to do the training for their agency, or working with the community, I can be reached. I run a nonprofit that focuses on active shooter prevention and research and education, called Brave Defender. So you can reach me at bravedefender.org. I've also got a training company that does a lot of the response training for law enforcement, things like that. So you can just reach me on that website, and I'll be more than happy to assist any instructor with getting their program and their community better prepared.
Awesome. And Mike, where can guys track you down?
drmikesimpson.com is my website. There's links to all my social media on that. Also links to my affiliates and everything else. And I'm on Instagram at Dr. Mike Simpson.
Roger that. Mr. Brian, you're as the elder statesman in the group. I'm going to give you the last word. And the biggest badass. I mean, I know Tim's a pretty big badass, but after today, I'm going to put you a step ahead of him. So
I appreciate that.
Any last words?
Yeah, I think it comes down to this. It's the before the event takes place. How prepped are you mentally, physically, emotionally? In the event, losing is never an option, and that should be in your head. And I look at this and I think to myself, man, there's no difference hell, most people are bigger, stronger, faster than me, but sometimes it's about art, and you got to work that. Iron sharpens iron. You gotta push yourself when you don't want to, and complacency does kill, and that's just that. But the one thing that we never got to is the after, and there's always an after. I don't care if it's Tim's car accident, if it's whatever it is, my shooting, man. Don't lose sight of why you do this job. Don't lose sight of what's important to you, and don't ever lose sight of your family. Don't cut them off. Don't push them out of the way. They know when you had a good day. They know when you had a bad day. And I'll tell you this, I got shot in both hands multiple times. I'm a grown man. I'm a former Marine. I was a SWAT commander. And there's nothing more humbling than going to the bathroom, and I'm 50 years old, and I have to knock on the wall to have my wife come and clean me because I can't even put paper in my hands. Don't lose sight of the people around you. They're going to be there when things go bad as well. Again, don't lose sight of why you do this, and when you know why you do it, you just freaking work harder because you owe it to yourself and you owe it to others.
Brian, you're a fucking rock star, dude. It's a complete honor to have you and the rest of you gentlemen to have you on this panel. I mean, I learned a ton. I know, just following the comments and I'm getting messages and emails all over the place. So what I'm going to do real quick is if you guys can stick around for 2 seconds, we'll AAR real quick after this. But I'll just do a quick goodbye to everybody and thank you guys all for being here and attending this roundtable on active threat response. Of course, if you guys want to get a hold of any of the instructors, I'm going to make sure that on the website, once we get it up and rolling for this roundtable, we'll have the links to all their socials and everything so you can reach out to them. Or you can always shoot me an email directly. And if pertinent, I can start putting you in touch or reach out to these guys for information or training and things like that. So the next roundtable is going to be on May 28th. May 28th, again, last Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there, and thank you for joining us on this roundtable, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe.